I work in an office and used to work an overnight shift from midnight to 8 a.m. On my lunch breaks, I would often take a nap. I work on the 14th floor, but that late at night, there are very few people around, so I would go to the vacant second floor and catch a few Z's. It was completely silent down there, with the exception of the occasional outside street noise. Also, they turned the heat off during the winter, so it would be cold down there. I would use my coat as a blanket, perfect napping temperature. The lights down there were motion sensor and would turn on by themselves as you walked down the hallway. There was a long hallway that went around the building that was used as a waiting area for a conference room. This waiting area had comfortable chairs that made a perfect little bed if you pushed the two together. I had a perfect spot behind a pillar. The only bad part about my spot was the lights there were wired backwards, meaning they were always on until you walked into that area and then they would turn off. I would just cover my eyes, but by the time the timer turned the lights back on, I was usually out anyway. So this night at around 3:30 a.m., I pushed my chairs together and went to sleep. Almost instantly something weird happened. I heard footsteps approaching the corner to the hall I was sleeping in. Along with footsteps, I heard keys jingling. I assumed it was the janitor, and laid still to allow him to pass. He would look at me and see my employee badge, and there wouldn't be any problems. I hear the footsteps get closer, and the keys get louder. Any minute now he would see me and stop, or keep walking. Either way, I would hear him pass and know I could relax. The problem was after he turned the corner, the footsteps and the keys continued, but they never got closer. It sounded as though he turned the corner and stopped and proceeded to march in place. I kept waiting for him to pass, but the sound stayed the same distance away. I didn't want to lift my head because honestly, I shouldn't have been down there sleeping and didn't want to get in trouble. The light was also still on. After a few minutes, I decided to see what the hell this guy was doing. Was he making noise to wake me up? Messing with me? I figured none of my supervisors would walk around with the keyring, so I probably wasn't in danger of getting in trouble. I tried to lift my head, and I couldn't move. I struggled to roll over as I was sleeping on my side and finally was able to force myself onto my back. I cannot move my arms or legs or speak or open my eyes beyond a slit small enough to see light. And that's when the lights turn off. The footsteps and keys, which hadn't stopped marching in place, began heading in my direction. I tried desperately to sit up or open my mouth or eyes, but I couldn't. Then I felt a heavy weight on my chest. The keys were on top of me, and I could distinctly feel two large hands on my chest holding me down. It felt as if someone had climbed on top of me and was holding me down with all the weight on my chest. I start to panic. I try to yell, but I can't speak. I try to move my arms to get the key man off me, and my arms won't move. I'm completely hopeless. I can't even open my eyes to see what was on top of me. It felt like it went on for an eternity, but it was only probably a minute or so. Finally, the weight lifted, and my eyes opened part way. There was nothing on top of me, or even around me. The footsteps had gone back around the corner, and the keys jingled off in the distance. I lifted my head, and to my horror, the chairs were no longer where I had pushed them. I always put them behind that pillar so people walking wouldn't see me, but now I was laying in the middle of the hall, the chairs pushed away from the pillar and window. The lights were still off, indicating that something had been moving recently. I started to hear a low droning sound in my ears, a low electric hum. I'm sweating like crazy. I grabbed my jacket to wipe my face, and when I pulled the jacket away from my face, I was back in my original spot. The sound was the lights overhead blazing away in the silence. No footsteps, no keys. I grabbed my things and went back upstairs. I don't believe in ghosts or the supernatural, or anything like that, and I've experienced sleep paralysis before as a side effect of medication. I'm pretty sure it was just a nightmare mixed with some form of sleep paralysis, but Jesus Christ, it felt so real and was horrifying. I later told a co-worker about what happened, and he said a worker who helped build this building had killed himself here during construction, and some people reported seeing the ghost of a construction worker in empty rooms and walking the halls. We both laughed about it. A ghost? Ha. Yeah, right. He said, people are stupid, man. They said they've even heard keys jingling and everything. Morons. Yeah, morons, right? This story takes place in a Southeast Asian city with a population of over 1.5 million. I didn't always live here. I was actually born and raised in a small town in the Midwestern US. You know, the kind where everyone knows everyone, and we only ever gain attention during an election year. My parents and I made the big move in 2014 due to a number of reasons. However, the biggest was so that my mother could be with her family, since this is her homeland. The town where all my relatives live is about 8 hours away. We had to move to our city because it's the safest in the region for foreigners, and my dad is pretty obviously a white man. Unlike every other college student in the world, I hadn't done much this summer. The heat was blistering all hours of the day, and I didn't have any money to spend, even if I was willing to leave our air-conditioned apartment. The only thing enticing me to the outdoors were the incessant sounds of construction due to a new unit being added next to our complex. However, leaving was obviously inevitable, so towards the end of the month, my parents and I went to buy groceries. The next day, my mum and I went to buy some things we had initially forgotten, and the day after that, the two of us went out again to pay some bills. That made 3 consecutive days of going out for the first time in literally a month. To say I was exhausted was an understatement. By 7 p.m. on the third night, I was already fast asleep on the living room couch. My mom woke up around 10 that same night and told me to head up to my room. I was too tired to do my entire night routine, so I quickly brushed my teeth and went upstairs. I noticed that my cat was already asleep in my bed, which happens once in a blue moon since he's basically my mum's shadow. So I got into bed while contorting myself into an angle that wouldn't disturb him. Only cat lovers will know what I'm talking about. I turned on a dim light, plugged in my phone, began playing a random YouTube video, and then eventually fell asleep. I don't know what time it was, but I was awoken to the feeling of my bed shaking. I tend to ignore movements like this, because they happen often when my cat sleeps with me, as he has a habit of scratching his ear. But there was a pretty strong earthquake just the night before, so I assumed it was perchance another one, making me open my eyes and look down at my cat to see which of the two it was. Indeed, he was scratching his ear. Oh, and there was my mom at the foot of my bed. Nothing out of the ordinary there. She was probably checking on me before her and my dad went out for their 5 a.m. walk as routine, and was bending down to pet the cat. I shut my eyes and was about to slip back into slumber when my half-asleep brain realized that a number of things were indeed out of the ordinary. With eyes that were barely open, I looked at my mum with blurred vision. That's when I noticed something bizarre. She was wearing one of my high school t-shirts. My mum and I are far from the same size, and she doesn't have a history of borrowing my clothes. Weird but not unsettling. Maybe she ran out of clean exercise shirts but decided to use one of mine. I then noticed she was also wearing another one of my high school t-shirts, but this one was wrapped around her head in a weird way that outlined the shape of it, not covering anything, but just framing the profile. In my peripheral, I noticed that my closet doors were wide open. My mum always nagged me to close them because she said that the cool air was wasted when it entered the closet, so I made sure to keep them closed to not burn aircon. I wasn't getting ready at that exact moment, so there was no reason for them to be open. Another random realization hit me when my brain finally registered the fact that while my mum does pet my cat when she comes in to check on me, she never bends down like the person in the room was doing. Looking back now, I don't think I've ever seen her bend like that since I was a kid. Keep in mind all these thoughts flooded my mind in about 5 seconds. Still, my half-asleep, half-stupid brain was more focused on why my mum was wearing my clothes, as opposed to all the things that were blatantly off in this situation. I sat up a bit, squinted my eyes so that I could read the shirt, since there was writing on the back that would help me distinguish if it was actually mine, and not just one that looked like mine. That's when the person turned to look right at me before running out of my room, maintaining an ungodly crouched position that will be burnt into my mind forever. It wasn't until he was near the stairs that I fully processed what was happening. That person was not my mum. They weren't even female. Instantly, I shot out of bed and instinctively wrapped my blanket around me to cover my nightclothes that suddenly felt too revealing. It was only then that I began screaming. I hesitantly followed him out of my room and watched as he ran down the wooden stairs with deafening steps that echoed throughout the 3rd floor, almost drowning out my piercing cry. If I was going to get my parents' attention, who were sleeping on the other side of a closed door on the 2nd floor, I needed to be louder. I stood at the foot of the stairs and pushed my lungs to their limit. I could practically feel the capacity stretch inside my ribcage. After what felt like ages but was probably only another 5 seconds, my parents' door swung open, and my mum ran up the stairs with a panic-stricken expression that I will never forget. She grabbed me by the shoulders and shouted, "What is it? What's wrong?" I turned to look at her, my mouth agape, and my brows furrowed in a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Had she not seen the man that had ran right past their open bedroom door? It all happened so fast, I wasn't sure if they had crossed paths or not. "Someone's in the house," I responded with a voice that I honestly didn't recognize. Without missing a beat, she wrapped her hand around me, ushered me down the stairs, and shouted, "Grab a gun," in my country's native tongue. We ran to my parents' bedroom where my dad stood in the doorway with tired eyes and slumped posture. I pushed him in, turned around and shut the door, simultaneously fumbling with the light switch so that we weren't in complete darkness. My dad ended up having to turn them on. I turned to him with the same incredulous expression I had when I looked at my mum. He had been standing in the doorway to his room too, in perfect view of the man running away, yet he seemed oblivious. "There's someone in the house," I repeated. I watched his face drop at my words. With the door now locked, I turned to my parents and watched them silently, waiting for them to do or say something. For 19 years, they had taken care of me and catered to my every need and want, but now there they stood, just as scared and defenseless as I was. In that moment, they were just people. My dad, an infamous Type A personality, kept his focus on the floor, processing the entire situation and deciding what to do next. My mother was the complete opposite. She had grabbed her phone and was dialing 911 while pulling her hair gently between her fingers. She said it wasn't working, so I took the phone from her and dialed 911 again. But when I lifted the phone to my ear, all I heard was a monotone voice say, "Sorry, your balance is too low to make this call." In this country, most of the phones are prepaid, so if you don't have money on your account, you can't make calls or texts. However, my mum said that she had added money to her account just a few hours earlier. I began to ring my aunt, who lived 8 hours away, but it worked fine. That's when we figured out you can only use cell phones to call other cell phones, and landlines to call other landlines, aka 911. The problem was, our landline was on the 2nd floor hallway, a few feet from the other side of the door. Once I told my parents what our only options were, my mum opened the window and began shouting for help in her native tongue. Similar to a knee-jerk reaction, I instantly shut the window. "Don't do that. They'll know we're defenseless, and they'll come back or come in." All the time this happened, we had been in the room for about 40 minutes. I was convinced that if they had left and then heard her screaming, they would come back, knowing we were sitting ducks. "Are you sure you saw someone?" Maybe you were dreaming, my dad said. This being his first string of words since barricading ourselves in. How could he have gotten in? The door had 2 locks and a heavy pole across it. After the lock on our screen door broke, my mum had insisted on putting a metal pole across the door to ensure no one would be able to get in. No, I know what I saw, I answered without hesitation. But my brain began dissecting the possibility of the figure simply being a figment of my imagination. The sounds and movements he made were so vivid, but the situation seemed surreal. There was no way someone can get inside with that pole acting as a shield, and neither of my parents had seen the man. Initially, I began to doubt myself, but on the outside, I stuck to my guns. Okay, we need to get out the room and call the police, my dad said. My overthinking got the best of me, as I thought about us leaving the room. What if there were more people? Were they waiting for us? Were they right outside the door, waiting, hiding, and preparing to spring out when we least expected it? Maybe they were still in our apartment, continuing to raid through our things since they knew that we were too scared to leave. Had they heard my mum screaming for help and returned? We searched the room for weapons to protect ourselves with, but we wouldn't find anything even remotely useful. What happened to the gun my mum was shouting for, you ask? That never existed. She just screamed it so the man would hopefully leave from fear. So with half a pair of broken scissors in my dad's hand, a small floor fan in my mum's, we prepared ourselves for whatever was on the other side of the door. My dad unlocked the door and swung it open swiftly, hoping to catch anyone out there off guard. The complete silence mixed with the eerie yellow light coming from our hallway seemed like a scene from a horror movie. Straight ahead, we all noticed that the door to the second-floor balcony was wide open, and the screen on the window next to it had been prized open. The first feeling to run through me was assurance. Assurance of knowing that I wasn't crazy and that I hadn't made it up. And the second was pure dread, knowing that I wasn't crazy and regrettably hadn't made this up. We searched the second floor and found no one, and nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. We then moved on to the first and found our pitcher of water dripping with condensation on the kitchen tabletop. My mum asked me if I had forgotten to put it back before I went to bed, but I distinctly remember only brushing my teeth. I knew I hadn't gotten it out. Our windows have the glass on the outside and the screen on the inside, contradictory to typical American windows, and we saw that the glass windows were never wide open, and the screen had been prized with. However, both the locks on the doors were bolted and the pole was still in place. So how did they get in? We figured that the man had initially attempted to come in by putting his hand through the small gap he made in the screen window, trying to reach for the door so that he could unlock it. However, his calculations were off, and he couldn't make the distance. So he climbed up to the second floor, did the same thing, and managed to do it. He did this by climbing through the apartment that the construction workers had yet to finish. We dialed 911 5 times, and despite the fact the police station is a 3-minute drive away, it took them no less than 45 minutes to arrive. While waiting, my mum knocked on the other apartments to let them know what was going on, but unsurprisingly, no one answered. The police eventually came and told us that someone had made a call earlier saying they heard a woman scream for help, my mum, but couldn't find the location of the screams. They searched the house and found no one, and didn't even tell us how to file a report. They're pretty useless. We called the landlord about this. She said that there hadn't been any break-ins in the past, but speaking to another neighbor, she confirmed that there had been 3, not too long ago. So that's dodgy. Over the course of the next few weeks, we found things had been stolen, like sunglasses, backpacks, jewelry, money, and stuff from our storage room. My phone was taken, and that's what I assume he was taking when he was crouched over my bed. He probably wanted the charger too, but my laptop and camera, which were both sitting on the desk next to my jewelry box, were untouched. My parents think it's because he was going to take the heavier items when he was going to leave, so he wouldn't have to carry them around. I didn't see anything in his hands when he left, though. He took 4 of my shirts, 2 of them being the exact same. He also went to my cousin's room and stole her towel, of all things. Thankfully, she had gone home for the summer, so she wasn't around, but it's almost as if the thief knew that. He went into her room and my room, but completely avoided my parents' room. I also couldn't get over the fact that he drank our water straight from the jug, which would have made sense since he climbed into the 2nd story. However, this country is notorious for being superstitious, and my mum said that thieves tend to leave water out because it makes the homeowners go into a deep sleep. Something about the water resembling the calming waves of an ocean. I've never been one to believe in superstition, and she thinks that's why I was able to wake up. Just a few hours after the incident, we decided that we were going back to the States. This wasn't the only occurrence affecting our decision, but it was the straw that broke the camel's back. I'm just grateful that we all came out safe and nothing worse happened. And I'm also incredibly grateful for my cat, since he's basically the hero for waking me up. In fact, my cousins are fighting over who will get to keep him once we leave. I was about 19 and still in college at the time. I've always had a hard time studying at my house, so I would usually go to a coffee shop in the evenings/late at night to study. Around that time, I would go to the McDonald's near my house, grab a burger and study in one of the booths since it was closer and I didn't want to drive to the city. This day I was sitting in the booth closest to the bathroom when an older man walks by in his 70s on his way to the bathroom. He stops to look at me and tells me that he loves my hair. I thank him and go back to studying, but he was still standing there. He continues, "My mother used to have chestnut-colored hair like that. She was beautiful." I'm trying not to be rude, so I respond with something generic and go back to work. He then sits down at my table uninvited and begins talking to me about his daughter, who is likely about my age. He goes on and on about how he likes to visit her and play music for her. He pulls out his phone and tells me he's going to show me a video of her. While I'm not thrilled that he's sitting with me, he seemed harmless and maybe a little lonely, so I let him enjoy some company. He pulls up the video and shows it to me. To my horror, it's shaky footage of a girl that was likely in her 20s, laying in a hospital bed in what appeared to be a vegetative state with her mouth gaping wide open, while I assume he was talking and singing to her in the background. He then breaks it to me that she's in a coma. I don't even remember what I said exactly, but I think I expressed how sorry I was that she was in that condition, and tried to call my boyfriend who was meeting me there after work. It's about 11 p.m. now. The man is sitting at my table, oversharing details about his life with me while I am clearly weirded out and trying to ignore him. He then gets up, and I watch him walk out the front doors to a large white van. The man opens the side door, and from what I could tell, he had been living in the van. The glimpse I got from the inside showed me a lot of cluttered belongings, such as clothes, bedding, and boxes. He crawled in and I thought he was gone for good, and I go back to studying for my big math test. I hear the front doors open again and look up. It's him. He walks directly back to my table and hands me a business card. He tells me to vote for him for the president and that he's out campaigning, and eventually goes back out to his van and takes off. The card just had his name and "For President" written on it with a cheesy slogan. Needless to say, after that, and a few run-ins with a homeless man, I stopped studying at McDonald's. To the presidential candidate living out of his van, let's not meet. Back in my late teens in Dublin, Ireland, I used to head to a particular nightclub every single week, and got to know most of the regulars there, to the point that I could sit at a table and know at least a few people. I was introduced to a new woman that no one really knew very well and said hello, and made very short and polite conversation, and then went about my time as normal, dancing and drinking. Nothing much of note happened during my time in the club. At the end of the night, I left a little earlier than my friends because I lived far away outside the city. I got a taxi home and got into bed, falling into a deep sleep. I woke up in the morning, sunlight streaming into the room, and immediately knew something was wrong. Too much weight was on the bed. I spun and looked down at the end of the room, and there, sat on the end of the bed, was the woman from the night before, staring at me wide-eyed with utter devotion and a weird smile. It was totally horrible. I had no idea what to say, so I said nothing. I was so weirded out by her expression and the whole bizarre nature of the situation. I was dumbstruck. It wasn't a lustful look. It was a spooky, obsessive, insane-looking look. I know for a lot of guys, the idea of having some random woman appear in their bedroom might be a thrill, but this was nothing like that. It was scary, plain and simple. I got up, got dressed, summoned a bit of courage, turned to her and said, "You're leaving. Now," and essentially marched her out the house, telling her that buses leave from the end of the road every half hour. She left without a word. From talking to friends and family, I pieced together what had happened. After I left the nightclub, she had tried to catch me up, but instead had lost me. She went back, asked around until someone told her the rough area I live in, got a taxi there, knocked on random doors waking up neighbors, and eventually one told her exactly where I lived, and then lied to my sister, saying that I had been expecting her. My sister was pissed off at being woken up, but let her in. From there, she got up to my room and sat there for God knows how long, silently watching me. As it turns out, almost no one from the club knew her at all, but we all assumed someone else must have known her. What really spooks me is that if she had wanted to hurt me for whatever reason, she easily found her way right into my family's house, right into my bedroom. And I shudder thinking about it. Before I begin, I'm going to say that I'm a 19-year-old man. I'm working a full-time job. I have since moved out of the place that this incident occurred in. What happened took place when I was about 6 years old. I lived in a decent neighborhood. We did have the occasional creepy person that would walk or bike by. We also had some apartment buildings where the people living there were heavy into drugs, but didn't bother anyone. They were nice people to talk to and frequently mentioned they were into the stuff. They never bothered me, so I didn't care. Now, enough with the background. The house I lived in at that point was very decent size. My dad also built a garage, a huge garage. Now, this is where that happened. The garage was huge. It had enough space for 3 vehicles, and rafters on the ceiling for storage of seasonal stuff, Halloween and Christmas, etc. Oh, and it takes place in December, in Atlantic Canada, and in Atlantic Canada we get some pretty nasty snowstorms and blizzards. On a day in December, I was being a little kid in the snow, and my dad was working in the garage on one of his projects. He had gotten thirsty and went into the house to grab a drink. When he came back out, he asked if I had gone into the garage. I asked why, and he said that there were footprints in the snow leading into the garage that he didn't think were his. I said no, and we both thought nothing of it. That evening my dad and I went to bed early. My mum works late and came home late that night and saw some of my toys that were in the rafters stored away were on the garage floor. She thought nothing of it, moved them and parked the vehicle in the garage, closed the garage door and went into the house, watched some TV and went to bed. Now my dad wakes up very early, 4 a.m. every morning, as he has to be at work at 5, and the garage door was open when he woke up, so naturally he was angry. He wakes up everyone and goes out to the garage and comes back in, and is freaking out. A lot of our expensive equipment was missing. We called the cops. The outside lights were flicked on, and we saw the same mysterious footsteps leading to the garage earlier, leading into the backyard and into the forestry behind my house. The cops searched the garage, and my mum brought up the toys falling from the rafters. The cops asked to borrow a ladder, and went up to check. They found a gun, a meat cleaver, 3 condoms, 2 of which were used. and I did not sleep for a week. I was terrified. They caught the guy 2 weeks later trying to sell all of my dad's equipment at a pawn shop. He confessed to everything. He said he broke into other houses on the street. He also started to watch our house for a whole month to learn our routines, so he wouldn't get caught. He had the weapons just in case, and he said that he chose to use the condoms when he saw my mum. He is currently serving a 15-year prison sentence. I don't want to know what would have happened if my mum, dad, or I had seen him. This story is my father's. It happened in the summer of 1993. My dad and his girlfriend, now stepmother, were living in Cardiff, Wales in the city centre. Not a particularly high crime area, a lot of student accommodation. The Warm as Toast Cafe, amusingly abbreviated on the front as Twat Cafe, was nearby. At 6 a.m, my dad gets up and walks down to the kitchen to get his morning coffee. As he walks into the kitchen, he's welcomed by a random man sat at the kitchen table, staring at him. Being the cool, collected guy he is, instead of freaking out, my dad asks the guy if he wants a cup of coffee. The breakfast intruder agrees and joins him. A few minutes later, my dad's girlfriend comes in, also doesn't freak out, and offers to make him some breakfast. So the three of them sit down, have breakfast, and have a chat for 20 minutes or so. Apparently the conversation was a bit weird and nonsensical, but they didn't say what it was about. The breakfast concludes, and they escort the intruder through the front door. After he leaves, he starts freaking out, and naturally they call the police. The police come, take statements, etc., and later in the day they're contacted by the police, saying that they apprehended the breakfast intruder. Turns out the guy was a paranoid schizophrenic and was breaking into odd-numbered houses on the street. My dad was the second house he'd entered. The first house, next door, he'd gone into was empty. This is where he left his tools, a sawn-off shotgun and a lot of ammo. His plan was to shoot anyone in the odd-numbered houses on the street. When the police arrested him, he told them that my dad and his girlfriend were the nicest couple he'd ever met, and that had stopped him carrying out his plan. When people say I'm too laid back for my own good, I tell them this story, and it never fails to shut them up. My brother moved in with me a few months ago, and got a job doing night shift custodial work at a nearby high school. His workday started at 10 p.m, and fortunately for him it's close enough to walk, because he gets off shift about 20 minutes after I have to leave for work in the morning, and he doesn't have a car. One night a little after midnight, he calls me in a panic, asking me to come down and pick him up because there's some kind of weird stuff happening. Those were his exact words, and there was no way he's sticking around by himself. My brother isn't the sort to freak out over nothing, so I hop in the car in my jammies and head down to the high school. A little background. As children, my brother was apparently sensitive. He often talked about various seemingly supernatural encounters. In one very old house we lived in, he told our parents that a man would come into his room at night and tell him bedtime stories. It wasn't until we were grown up that our father told us that a distant relative had committed suicide in that same room. That was my brother's room, years before either of us were born, and that my brother's description of the man matched the deceased relatives to a T. I'm the exact opposite. Nothing creepy or supernatural ever happens to me or around me. If it happened there before, it doesn't happen when I'm there, and often doesn't return after I leave. I've had enough people perplexed tell me that their ghost went away after I visited their home, or that a particular place stopped being creepy after I was there, or had someone acting crazy calm down after I spoke to them. To be clear, I must be some kind of natural repellent for creepy things. So I get to the high school, and my brother is standing by the front doors. He runs over to the car and tells me that I have to come and make it stop. It was the sound of a locker opening and closing just out of sight. He would turn a corner of a hallway and hear a locker open and slam closed behind him, or around the corner of the next hallway. We go into the school. my brother practically hanging on my arm, which probably looked hilarious as I'm shorter and plump, and he's tall and super skinny, like a modern version of Laurel and Hardy. We walk up and down the halls and nothing happens. No sounds, no movement, no lockers opening or closing, no cold spots, no inexplicable drafts, and no creepy noises or feelings. We walk down the last hallway, at which point it's getting on for 1 a.m, and I'm tired and just want to go back home. There's one locker standing ajar. As we approach it, my brother reaches out to close it, pulls his hand back and says, "You do it." I close the locker and nothing happens. Finally, my brother says I can go, as long as I promise to come back the next night if there are any more problems. A week later, he comes home and hands me a thank you note with a $50 Amazon gift card from the head of the custodial department for services rendered. Easiest $50 I ever made. I'm a girl, and this happened when I was 20 in the early 2000s, when people used landlines and cell phone calls were not unlimited. This happened in a town about an hour away from Sacramento. My friend was house-sitting for a family that her family was friends with from church. She was to house-sit in the country, just outside of town for a week. They had animals like cats, rabbits, a donkey, and a horse. The family also had dogs too, but the family took dogs with them. My friend was in charge of feeding the animals and watching the place. She didn't have to get the mail daily because they had this metal lockbox-style mailbox down their long driveway. They didn't have any neighbors for miles, just fields of alfalfa, cattle, and corn, so I guess the lockbox was for safety. Towards the end of the week, she asked if I wanted to spend the night and keep her company. I thought it sounded fun. I had moved out of my aunts and uncles and gotten my own apartment, so I told her I'd pick her up on the way there after I got out of work. We got there around 9:30 p.m, grabbing dinner on the way. We went into the barn first thing and fed the animals. It was late for their dinner, and they made their hunger known with their animal noises. We made sure they had water, then went inside. The house was this big ranch-style house, single-story. Their living room was to the left as you walked into the home, and there was a long hallway directly to the right of the entrance that led to where the bathroom and bedrooms were. Straight ahead was a dining area, and to the left of that was the kitchen area and the patio. They did not have an open floor plan. In the kitchen on the opposite side of the dining area was a long hall that had several doors. My friend explained that the wife ran daycare centers out of the house, and these rooms were play areas for the kids she took care of. We didn't bother going over there because we had no interest. We watched some TV, ate our leftovers, and talked about the people we knew. As it got later, she turned on the house alarm and said she didn't like sleeping in other people's beds, so she'd been sleeping on the couch, then offered it to me. She would sleep on one of the two huge recliners that reclined so far back it was almost flat. The chairs were really comfortable, so I said I'd take the chair. I went and laid back in a chair with a blanket. We turned off the TV and were talking for maybe 20 minutes in the dark, when the motion sensors flooded lights and started shining through the windows, lighting up the room. Now I have no idea why people in the country think it's okay to not have curtains or blinds, because to me that's insane. We both go quiet, and Amanda says, maybe it was one of the cats. That's when we start hearing gravel crunch, like a person walking across gravel in the parking area outside. My chair was the closest to the window, and I slid carefully down to the floor, clutching the stupid blanket the whole time. The floodlights timed out, and my friend slid to the floor too. We laid on our stomachs in the dark, not knowing what to do for a minute, when we heard a loud bang, and all of a sudden the house alarm started blaring and the floodlights turned on again. It was so loud we covered our ears and I began to panic. I swear I've never been so close to peeing my pants in all my life. I began crawling towards the keypad for the security, because I've seen the commercials. There's a button you push when a person responds to you in case of an emergency, or at least sends the police. The main screen says patio 1 of 2 open. Amanda starts to cry a little and hits the call assistance button on the pad, but nothing happens. There's no assistance. I ask her where the phone is, and she says there's a phone in the kitchen and one in the parents' room down the hall. So our choices are to go to the kitchen past the windows and next to one of the patio doors, or go down the hall to the parents' room and use the phone there. I ask her where the other patio is, and she says that it's in the daycare part of the house. It was an easy decision. We go inside the parents' room as it's pitch black. I ask her where the phone is, but she says she thinks we have to turn a light on. I don't really want to, but we have no choice. We don't have a flashlight, and I didn't bring my cell phone because I had limited minutes. It was a simpler time, and Amanda didn't even own a cell until after this happened. She turned on the lights and we began looking around the room. Not only did these people not have curtains on any window, but they didn't even have a closet door. We see a golf club leaning against the wall by the bed. They probably have it instead of a baseball bat, I think, which is what we had next to our bed at home. We figured if we hit someone with it, it's gonna leave a mark, so she grabs it and we continue our search for the phone. Looking at the obvious places, we find a cordless phone stand, minus the actual phone. The alarm is still raging. We have a light on, and the person who opened the patio door is bound to notice. She asks if we should use the locate phone buttons. I look at her and respond, yeah, if you want some strange guy coming in here with it and asking us if we're looking for something. I'm getting mad, and I'm scared. Standing there knowing that we have to go to the kitchen, house alarms suddenly stop, and it goes country quiet. If you've lived in the country, you'll know what I'm talking about. There isn't another golf club for me to grab, so I make her go out first, flipping every light on and keeping the doors we pass in the hall closed. We double-check the security panel, and it still says patio open. We hit the call button. It doesn't work. Double-checking the front door is locked. We start for the kitchen. I tell her we have to check the patio near the kitchen, and I grab a big knife that wasn't even close to being sharp from the kitchen. We check the patio door near the kitchen. It's locked. We turn on all the lights and grab the phone and dial 911. This phone isn't a cordless phone. It's one of the old ones with a wire cord attached to the wall. My friend is on the phone with the dispatcher telling her what happened, and I hear a whistle coming out from the kitchen window. The thing people don't think about, because I didn't think about it, thinking that safety was turning on the lights, is that while you have the reflection of the inside of the window, people on the outside have a clear view of you, unless you press your face against the window. I hear the whistle again. It sounds like someone's trying to get someone else's attention kind of whistle, but I don't see anything outside. I'm not pressing my face to the window to see if I'm the person they're whistling for. My friend is still talking to dispatch and crying and saying she doesn't have the address to the house. She hands me the phone and I say, "Hello?" The dispatcher lady, who sounds annoyed, tells me she needs an address to send police to. I ask that she trace the call and she says something like, "You're house sitting and you don't even know where you're at?" Scared, angry and overwhelmed, I hand the phone back to Amanda and start looking for something with an address in the kitchen. I'm looking in the junk drawer, on the counter, the fridge, keeping my eyes down the hall that has the daycare rooms, knowing that on the other side of those doors is a patio that was opened. Amanda tells the lady that she doesn't pick up the mail because of the lockbox, and then a few seconds later removes the phone from her ear and stares at me with a blank face. I ask her if they're tracing the call because I can't find anything with an address. She responds, "She said I hope the police find you in time," and hung up the phone. I was now really scared and angry. We knew that there were people outside. We knew that the patio door to the daycare area was open. We did not know what to do. We stood in the kitchen silent for what seemed like forever, but was probably just a minute. We picked up the phone and dialed 411. I told Amanda that they would have the number to the police department. As calmly as I could, I explained what happened to us to 411. I included the 911 dispatcher and said we really needed the phone number of the town's police department. and we heard a huge metal bang outside the kitchen window by the patio door. It sounded like someone had dropped something metal and heavy. Amanda started to cry. I couldn't hold in my fear anymore and began crying too. The 411 operator said they were connecting us and would stay on the line with us after getting pissed at the 911 dispatcher on our behalf. A police officer answered the phone, and the 411 operator started explaining what was happening. They were asking to disconnect once we had established connection. The police asked a few questions, and we heard the whistle again and light flooding around the house. I was too scared to look outside, and we had never turned on the patio light because we had to walk past the patio window to get to the switch. We told the policeman on the phone about the whistle, and he said that there should be several policemen showing up shortly and to stay on the line. We were just outside the town limits and knew that it might take a few minutes. Having an officer on the phone made me feel a little better, but I was still really scared. He told us that the police arrived and were coming up the drive. The policeman said to put down the phone and open the door, so I did. What I saw was a police pickup truck with spotlights flashing into the pasture that ran along both sides of the drive. 2 officers, not with handguns, but with shotguns, walking slowly beside the truck as it came up the long drive. 4 officers approached the house asking our names. One went to the phone and said they were here and hung up the phone. They ordered us to stay in the dining room and began searching the house and property. One by one they returned. The last one came back in through the patio door by the kitchen. He said he had searched the barn, and the horses scared him, and the horses also looked spooked. He asked what other animals were in the barn. They told us they didn't find anyone in that daycare patio, and it was not locked. There was, however, a broom handle in the track to prevent it from being opened too far. I looked at the patio door that the officer entered in, and saw there was not a broom handle in the one. Then I felt dumb because he just walked through it. They lectured Amanda about not knowing the address of the house she was supposed to be responsible for, and other stuff I don't remember. After finishing statements, they said they'd stick around and look, and if we wanted to leave, we could. They could lock the bottom lock, but not activate the alarm, and we were cool with that. We were out of there so fast, we got in my car and went to her mum's. Mentally exhausted, we fell asleep, and I went to my office job the next morning. She said she really didn't want to go back to the house, but had to feed the animals their breakfast. Her mum told her to take her sister, and she did. That afternoon, she called me at work. She was really nervous and began telling me that when she went into the house, there were footprints in poop on the carpet. I said it was probably the cops that checked the barn. She said she didn't know or pay attention. She also said that when she went to the barn to feed the water to the animals in the morning, someone had tied all the rabbits' legs together in their hutches. They had 10 rabbits. The kids used for 4-H. Amanda then continued to say there was a note with the word lucky scribbled on the back of a pizza coupon she thought came from the refrigerator door because all the flyers were missing a coupon. It took a while for them to untie the rabbits, and Amanda asked her mum to find someone else from the church to finish house-sitting. She wasn't going back. She also told the officers what she came back to, but no one was ever caught, and the police never called to update us. I was 16 and working in a locally owned fast food restaurant. Everyone working was teenagers, except the owner, an adult man called Fred. I was working the cash register in front, but had no customers. My co-worker, a fellow teenaged girl, came running up to me, insanely flustered, grabbed my arm, and began dragging me to the drive-thru, whispering on the way that I needed to look out the window. The whole thing happened so fast I didn't even question her, I just did it. There was a grimy little old man idling at the window. His pants were undone and he was exposed. Now, I don't stick around and stare at the situation, so I can't say for sure, but it did not strike me as accidental. I whipped around the corner and darted for our boss, and spilled what was going on. Fred was probably around our parents' age. To my surprise, he didn't say a word. He bolted out of his seat and to the back door. Seconds later, Fred came charging around the building, shrieking like a lunatic, running at the car. The flasher saw him coming and took off. All of us employees were totally shocked. Fred was a really mild-mannered guy. I'd never seen him so much as frustrated, but it had appeared he was going to murder the dirty old man. As teenage girls, this was our one real encounter with a major pervert, so we didn't know how to feel or react. We were all giggling nervously and awkward when Fred stormed back in the door. He snapped at us to stop laughing. I'll never forget what Fred said next. There are a lot of bad people in this world, girls. There are going to be men like that who try stuff and worse. You can't ever let them get away with it. That man just assaulted you, and it's not funny and it's not okay. Some things you can joke about, but sexual assault isn't one of them. He then called the police. Fred is still working at the restaurant, and I sure hope he doesn't retire before my daughter is old enough to get her first job. When I was 6, and my brother 8, we had a room in a town home that shared a wall. Creepy things would happen in that room, mainly due to our imagination. We once had a friend who was a black widow spider that would come out at night and hang out in the corner by the door. We would talk to it and make up stories about what it did during the day. Anyway, one night we were trying to get to sleep, but kept hearing pounding on the wall. We let it happen for a while before we screamed for our mum. She was disheveled at the time and came into the room and said, "What?" We explained to her that there was repeated banging against the wall, but when she came into that room it stopped. She said it was just the wind. Keep in mind this was a very likely explanation due to the fact that it was monsoon season in Arizona. She said she would come in and check on us in a bit. That evening was difficult for her. She was breaking up with her boyfriend due to his drug abuse issues, so dealing with creepy sounds was not on the top of her priorities list. Not 5 minutes after, the banging continued, this time louder, and somehow closer. I screamed again, and ran out into the living room. My mum was standing in a very defensive posture with tears streaming down her face, and her boyfriend looked very angry. He grunted and immediately left. When outside and in his car, he held down on the horn of his car for a good minute before finally leaving. I guess it was his rage quit. She was so relieved when he left and made sure to lock the door and the bolt and the chain. She brought me back to our room, where my brother said that the sound stopped once I screamed and left the room. My mum sat in the room with us and talked to us until we fell asleep. There was no more banging that night, and in the morning my mum woke up early and sat us down in the living room. This was something that had never happened. She didn't mention the breakup with her boyfriend. There was something else more pressing. Our doorknob was busted and unlocked, and someone had scraped at our bolt lock. There were half a dozen police outside. She explained to us that the neighbors had been broken into, and they had tried to get into our house as well. Luckily for us, our additional security measures, i.e. the bolt lock and chain, meant they couldn't get in. She brought us over to talk with the neighbor. We played with the kids next door a lot, and they happened to be staying at their grandma's that night for a sleepover. We walked around their house to see that everything was gone. Everything. Even their food had been stripped from the cabinets. One thing that became very apparent during the tour of this house: they were avoiding their living room. There were many police officers there and interviewing the mum. When we finally got to the living room, we find out why. The wall of their living room was connected to our bedroom. There was an indent in the wall about 6 feet in diameter and about a foot deep. Turns out the robbers were trying to break into our house through our shared wall. They broke into 3 other houses that night via the front door, but none of the others had bolt locks. Somehow the robbers thought it would be easier to chisel through the wall than to go through the bolt lock. What they weren't prepared for was the fact that our particular unit was added after the others. The shared wall was actually a solid brick exterior wall, unlike the others in the complex. They had spent hours trying to get through when they could have just easily busted down the door. After that day, my mum never told us again the noise was just the wind. Again. I used to work at a homeless shelter on night shift. I saw a lot of odd things happen during those years, but by far the strangest thing was the night I thought I was witnessing the beginning of the zombie apocalypse. Ned, a 35-year-old alcoholic, got up to have a smoke. I let him out in the courtyard and went to do some chores. This was at about midnight, so about 10 minutes later, I go look outside and Ned is gone. This isn't weird because, as noted, Ned is an alcoholic, and it was still bar time. I sit at my desk and start doing paperwork when I hear a rustling outside. I look up, and that's when I see Ned in the window with blood all over his face. I open the door and ask him what happened. That's when he growled at me and ran forwards with his arms outstretched. So I slammed the door and back away. He fumbles with the knob and growls some more, and another guy at the shelter comes by the office and sees this and backs away. Ned then stopped trying to get in and began running around the yard growling and began climbing a fence. I called 911 as I had no idea what was going on. The dispatcher is so confused by my description that she says she will send police to talk to me. The cops show up, and Ned runs at them, growling and snarling, hurling himself over the fence to do this. One cop pulls out his gun while the other pulls a taser. Neither fire. I'm watching from the window with the other client. Ned's blood is all over the window with spit and mucus. The cops are yelling at Ned, who all of a sudden gets up, walks towards my door, grabs a cigarette butt, and lights up. The cops approach him with their weapons still out. He looks at them and smiles and says, "Didn't do it, man." Turns out Ned had a seizure disorder that causes him to run around rather than fall over and shake. But to me, the dude went full-on zombie. I'm a 27-year-old female. I'm recently moved into a nice apartment in a safe neighborhood with my 2 dogs, Charles and Wigwam. Charles is a Corgi German Shepherd mix and is the most loving, but overly obnoxious, while Wigwam is a Lhasa Apso, who is quiet, sweet, and most definitely scared of his own shadow. I've only been in my new place for about a month after this experience. I highly doubt I'm going to make it here for the duration of my long lease. The way these apartments are set up is that each floor has its own set of doors that lead to 4 apartments and a fire escape door that only appears from the inside. I'm on the back side of the building, which places my patio about 10-ish feet from the fire escape stairs. I take my dogs out 3 times a day, midnight being the latest I'll go out by myself, and every time I leave my apartment, I put the bar lock on my patio door and lock my front door without fail. About a week ago, we had a snowstorm, and I had cracked my patio door because I love cold weather and I'm an adult and want to watch the snowfall. It was around 11 p.m, and I decided that since it was getting late I should take the dogs out for the night, since they both hate the snow. This would be a quick trip. I go to lock the patio door and decide against it, because I'm on the freaking 5th floor and I'm only going to be outside for a few minutes. I get the dogs ready, grab my keys and lock my door as I leave the apartment. I go down to the designated pet area with my beloved dogs and let them do their thing. Then back to the apartment we go, safely. Or so I thought. This is where I thought I was losing my mind. But in actuality, it was about to go down. As soon as we walked into the apartment, my dogs run over to the patio door, and I notice the door is shut and the bar is locked. I immediately think that's strange, but didn't connect the dots, so I go to the kitchen to get the dog treats, and both dogs start going crazy, growling at a large cedar chest in the living room. And as I'm walking to see what the commotion is about, I see a pair of eyes creeping from under the chest lid. I stood there for about 5 seconds before I realized what I was seeing, and calmly walked backwards to the front door, opened it, and told my dogs I was letting them go outside. They ran out without leashes, and I immediately get them, and myself, into the car, locked the doors and called the police. They showed up in less than 5 minutes, go up to my apartment, and after about 22 officers are dragging a 40-ish-year-old guy in handcuffs, and then the plot thickens. This dude had been watching me since I moved in. and had been staking out my place waiting for an opportunity to get inside because he knew I lived alone. If that's not creepy enough already, he had a fanny pack, since it's still the 90s, and he had a pocket knife, needles, ketamine, and a picture of me from the day I moved in. And his plan was to sneak in through my patio door, wait for me to fall asleep, and, well, you can imagine the rest. Needless to say, I didn't sleep for days because I thought he would come back. Luckily, he's still in jail. But I will never forget those eyes. I'm going to start this story by taking you back to June 3 years ago. My partner Johnny comes upstairs and finds it's cute. I'm checking him out on OkCupid. I'm confused, as I haven't logged in lately, like in months. How could I have been looking at his account? I log in and check it out. There's a list of 7 or so people that have been checked out from my account today. Johnny's included. And also someone I work with. Well, that's embarrassing. Nope, wasn't me. Time to change my password. The next day at work I was sure to bring it up and laugh about the fact that my OkCupid account was hacked to the person who was in my view list. I didn't want this person thinking I actually looked at his account. We worked too closely together, and I already get the impression he may see me as more than his boss. It always pleased him that his luggage tags printed his middle name and first initial as Chris T. This is not the type of person who should see his name written out, like he's God's gift to Earth, so I'll refer to him as Chris. Chris just laughed off the OkCupid hacking comment I made. I found it strange he had no questions or comments on the subject. Most people would at least ask if you changed your password, but there was nothing from Chris. Regardless, I brushed off the situation. A few days later, I was out of office for work, and Johnny messages me saying it happened again, that I'd checked him out on OkCupid. No, I didn't, but I changed my password again anyway. July. It's a weekend. I'm having a lazy morning in bed with Johnny when I get a Facebook notification. Your account has been logged into from a new location. The IP address points to Chris's hometown. Now my heart was racing. What the hell's going on? I take care of the Facebook password and screenshot the notification. Later that night, I get a text from Chris. Happy 4th, boss, lol. I assume he's drunk and worried about being caught having his access to my Facebook revoked so quickly. But no, it can't be him doing this. It's just a coincidence, right? Johnny is convinced it's Chris, but that means someone I work with on a very small team is targeting me. This will make work nearly impossible. I can't talk to anyone at work about this. I'll have no way to run my department. The situation will get minimized. Chris drank a lot. I'd seen it at work events, or when we traveled just the two of us. He often got out of hand, but everyone brushed it off. He's young. It was funny. We've all had those nights. But as long as you showed up to work the next day, it's fine. I brought it up to him once. Hey Chris, you need to be more cautious about how much you drink at work events. He didn't speak to me for 3 days. I offended him. Told him that he's not allowed to have fun at work events. He told me when he finally snapped at me, and I recoiled. He's 3 times my size, and we're already in a secluded space at work. One time while traveling with just the two of us, I got very sick. I told him I couldn't make it out for dinner, so Chris offered to pick something up from a nearby store. He knocked on my door, handed me the water he got me, and tried to make small talk as I thanked him and indicated I was going to lay down. It was apparent by his stance in my hotel room doorway. He wished to come in. He moved an inch closer, and I said goodnight and shut my door and locked every door I could. It wasn't the only time he made me feel uncomfortable. I hadn't noticed any other accounts being hacked for a while. I was cautious around Chris, even disassociated when I could. I avoided work outings if he was going, would back out of lunch plans that he decided to go to once he knew I was going. But we often had to work very closely regardless. We were a team after all. I couldn't do my job without him, nor he without me. October evaporated away, which led us to November. Johnny was online checking out his FetLife account one evening. He saw I was also online via the old messenger they used to have. Johnny asks me if I'm logged in. I'm not. Again, my heart is racing. It's different this time though. The violations are beginning to feel commonplace, normal, expected. But this hacking is extreme. No one outside my FetLife friends knows about this account. Definitely no one I work with. And there's some faceless nude photos of me there. I reach out to FetLife. They gave me the IP address of the last login. It's the same as the Facebook hack. Crap. I can't avoid this anymore. I can't pretend it's just coincidences anymore, but I need proof it's Chris. All I have is an IP address and intuition. I can't take that to HR. The police, perhaps? Will they help or make matters worse if they need to contact my employer? I start looking into the login history of any account that tracks it. My bank account. Why, there's an iPhone logging into it daily. I don't have an iPhone, but Chris does. Crap. This is real. This is happening, and I don't know what to do. I call the bank while at work and ask them about the unknown login. Chris is at his desk right next to mine. The conversation is easily overheard, and I hang up with the bank. They can't help. Chris doesn't say a thing. Under normal conditions, a co-worker might inquire, perhaps. Wow, is everything okay? Did you change your password? Is your money missing? But no. Nothing from him, though. It's a bit out of character. He's always interested in my personal life. The next weekend, I wake up to a phone call. The caller is calling from my phone number. My heart skips a beat, but I answer. No one responds. I just hear breathing. That's it. I've had it. I'm losing my sanity. I spent weeks, months researching IP addresses and how I might be able to use the only info I have. I lost sleep. I can't focus at work, and Johnny is worried about me and my safety, and I am too. But what can I do? Johnny suggests we go call the police. I don't want to, but I am at a dead end, and agree. The officer is kinder and more receptive to my situation than I expected. This serves as a reminder to me that it is a big deal, and I shouldn't minimize it in my own thoughts. She takes the report, every detail. They will use the IP to subpoena the ISP. Weeks go by. The officer on my case claims there's no crime. The ISP records were never obtained. December rolls around. My work email keeps doing this strange thing. Messages I've read keep being marked as unread. Weird. Is it him, or just the multiple devices I use to check it on? I'm unsure. I can't tell. The server doesn't keep a login history that I can see. Should I talk to IT? I don't know them well. Will they help? But that would make this situation real, and known at work. No, not yet. I can't bring myself to do it. I can't do this anymore. My heart is constantly racing. The slightest noise sends me into panic. I get a security camera for my front door, and worry a bit less when I hear the door slam from the wind, or when the dogs bark at something they hear. I'm becoming comfortable living in fear. As much as it is impacting my health, at least I have the pepper spray John got me, and I carry it whenever I'm outside. Chris and I have shared an account we use for work. Maybe I can get an IP address from that. If it matches, that's some proof, right? Dead ends. What if I sent him an IP tracker? I've learned that you can place an invisible pixel in an email and it will send you the IP address of where it was read. All I have of Chris is his work email and a Gmail. I test both on myself, of course. I can't take the risk of him figuring out I'm onto him. Damn it. Our work email blocks it, and Gmail reroutes it to their HQ. Another dead end. More hours, days, and weeks pass. I've called private investigators, and they're all impressed I've tried the tactics they already have at their disposal. I feel confident that I'm doing all I can, but more lost that the professionals can't help. February comes in. One last attempt. It's a week before I have a 7-day out-of-country trip with Chris. It's with a large group this time, but I'll be working very close, too close, with him. I sent Chris an email with a shortened link that will track what IP address it was when it's clicked from. I've tested this and it seemed to work, but I'm shaking. What if it tips him off? What if he knows I'm onto him and he attacks me at work? What do I send him to get him to click? I find a local event that this particular breed of neckbeard would be interested in. Hey Chris, saw this and thought you might be interested. 5 minutes later, Chris replies. Pure panic, no excitement, maybe a mix of both sets in. I don't care what the reply says. I check the IP tracker. It got a hit. I'm shaking. I can barely type or hold my phone. It's the same IP address as the Facebook and FetLife hack. I got it. I have the proof I need. It's Chris who's been stalking me via my accounts. My intuition was right. As much as I didn't want it to be confirmed as him, it was. There's relief. A weight had been removed. But then it sets back in. What do I do now? Go to HR? Back to the police? We've got that trip coming up. I need the team there to do the job. I'll wait till after I'm back. It's not that bad. I'm used to living like this now. Johnny thinks I'm insane for considering it. He's right. I am. I've lost touch with reality. This situation has me unable to determine what levels of uncomfortable one can and should deal with. A night of debate, and I made my decision. I won't wait. I'll do it now. I text my boss, Jay, the next day asking him to meet me for lunch on Sunday. I need to talk to you away from the office. This is not a normal request. We're close at work, but this is bizarre to him. He tells me I'm scaring him. I wish I could tell him not to worry. The following day we meet for lunch. I'm so nervous that I could vomit. This is it. This makes this all real now. I'd tell him everything. I'm worried he may minimize the issue. Chris is just a kid. He didn't mean anything. I'll talk to him tomorrow. After I finish speaking, Jay is at a loss for words. We have a plan in place to take this to HR tomorrow, and he's already helping me find someone to replace Chris on our work trip. Again, I'm relieved and nervous at the same time. It's all going down tomorrow. 7 months of living in fear, and I can finally see an end. Monday rolls around, pepper spray in pocket, and I picked out a work outfit that would conceal it today. Jay calls me and asks me a question. I don't remember what, but I take it as an invitation to go to his office. Anything to get away from the person I now know, without a doubt, has been hacking and stalking me. Jay wasn't expecting me, but understood. The department head is in his office. Jay is about to inform him of my situation. Having my story told by a third party was surreal. I filled in the details where needed and gave them the folder of evidence that I had collected to the HR. Screenshots, IP addresses, written accounts of the timeline up to the point, the emails from Chris confirming his involvement, and the info from the IP tracker. The day is a haze. I was at HR's office at least twice, saw the police drive through the campus, and had to fight my way with the HR director. He didn't feel I had enough evidence to prove the email I sent to Chris's Gmail was actually the Chris that worked here. I dug through my work email and bam, he emailed my work email from his Gmail account. Once. Enough evidence for our non-believer. Hours go by. It was almost 3 p.m. What the hell was going on? If I keep leaving my desk, Chris will know something's up. I can't call HR and ask. He'll hear the conversation. Chris walks over to me. "Oh crap," he says. He's shoving his work phone into my face too close for comfort. He got an invite to go to HR for 4. I'm screaming inside. No one else is around. If he's going to do something to me, now is the time. That notice is the forewarning of, "You're being fired." That's how they do it at my job. I manage to look concerned and tell him, "I'll let you know if I get one," insinuating maybe our team is being let go, not just him. He walks away. No idea where to. I sit at my desk, shaking in fear. I don't know when he will return. How could HR betray me like this? They know the situation. Damn it, they should have warned me if they were about to send it. I could have fled. I could have gone somewhere safe. Mike stops by my desk, just to say hi and offer me some leftover catering. But I can't eat right now. In this moment, Mike has offered me so much more than the leftovers. He has no idea what was going on but can see in my face something is wrong. I asked to walk back to his office with him. Chris will never find me there. It's got to be done by now. I know Chris will be escorted back to gather his things. I do not want to be there for that. I sneak into Jay's office. He checks the area for me and Chris is gone. I heard from HR. As per HR, I'm not allowed to speak to anyone as to why Chris was fired. Are they serious? This leaves me so vulnerable. If Chris decides to come back to work, no one would stop him. In fact, they would welcome him with open arms. And I'm left looking like the monster that fired the nice, quiet kid. That week, the IT department took a few extra days to gather Chris's devices. I had time to look through them during that period. The days before our trip was one of so much discovery. Not just what I found on his computer, but what I learned from the people around me. The day after he was fired, I looked into his laptop. IT had no issues getting me into his files. I was Chris's boss, so I needed to see his work. His picture folder, a lot of personal stuff, stupid memes, vacation pictures, screenshots of the naked cam girls he chatted with, and me. Some pictures I had never seen before, some I had. The pictures I was familiar with were from a cruise I went on months earlier with Johnny. Only these were the ones I deleted. I had a GoPro set to take pictures every 10 seconds that hung from my wrist. While walking around, I inadvertently took up close-ups from my arse in a swimsuit. Upon importing my vacation pictures, I deleted those from my computer. Why were they still on the card? Then there were some pictures from my Google account. Well, it was a picture of a screen. He got into my Google account too? Why didn't I catch that one? Then the ones I had never seen. Pictures that had been taken around the office and on work trips, me at my desk, me bent over setting up gear, a close-up, a hint of cleavage shot from above. His phone was more of the same. A close-up of my arse while he sat behind me during a struggle with an AV rack in a closet while in a dress. Video from under a table during a meeting when I'm wearing a skirt. Zoomed in upskirt pictures. Pictures of dates I had written on a post-it. Pictures of my phone settings showing my FetLife account. The nausea sets in again. I remember all these moments in the pictures he'd taken of me. Him nonchalantly on his phone looking like he was slacking off or answering an email. Little did I know he was filling his spank bank with images of me during work hours and keeping a record of my days off. The creep. I got into his browser history and it was sickening. He searched how to hack someone's text messages. He stalked friends of mine on Facebook as well as my partner. He got into my Amazon, Gmail, FetLife, work email, OkCupid and bank account. He read old emails of past relationships, looked at the places I visited, and stalked images from events I go to. There was hard evidence now. I took it to the local police near work. They couldn't handle it, so I went to the county prosecutor's office. Most people wouldn't think of that. It was suggested by a friend of Johnny's. They had a computer forensics department and could handle the case. I met with an amazing detective. He took my packet of evidence and listened to the whole story. It was becoming easier to tell now, especially when it's to focus on the facts. I knew I couldn't tell the people I worked with why Chris was fired, but for my safety, I knew I had to tell a few people, just the ones closest to me. Once they knew the story, I heard things from them like, Chris would complain you didn't pay him enough. He also lied and said he made half of what he actually did. I even fought to get him above normal rises for 2 years. He lied and said I would withhold work from him. They usually responded to him by telling him to ask to my boss or HR. Obviously he never did. You can't take lies to HR nor directors. He spread lies around the office, coercing co-workers to take his side when I wasn't aware there was sides to be had. From these people, I learnt more about the obsession Chris had with me. He craved to have power over me. He showed them my FetLife profile and bragged about how compatible we were on OkCupid. He even spoke about being obsessed with my partner. He told them how he tried to catfish me on Reddit. I couldn't blame them though. Chris had laid the groundwork and a bit of gaslighting on them. I was a bad person and Chris was their friend. Chris was really good at playing the victim and never was able to take any self-responsibility. 9 months went by. I followed up with the detective often. It took a while to subpoena his devices from my company, then run forensics. In early September, I got a call from the detective. They arrested Chris. They showed up early in the morning at his house where he still lived with his parents and admitted to everything. He took the card from the GoPro and recovered the images. He got my passwords once while I walked away from my computer. He went through my phone when it was left at my desk. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall. The shock to his family of the type of person he actually is. Him cowering while in handcuffs, face to face with what he'd done. No hiding behind a computer screen anymore. I was on vacation when this happened. I remember thinking, it's not long now till everyone at work will know. He's got a court date set. By then it's public record. I can't help if people know at that point. I didn't have to wait that long though. Later that day, co-workers started sending me a link. Hey, didn't you work with this guy? What a creep. The link was sent to the county prosecutor's PR page, announcing Chris's arrest, mugshots and all. I came back to work and was able to have the truth come out, and it was liberating. It took another 9 months for his final court date. I worked with prosecutors during that time to determine how I wanted to proceed. I opted for a probation period, instead of going through trial and fighting for jail time. While Chris deserves the jail time, he wasn't worth my time nor effort, and trial would give him a slim chance of getting off scot-free. Also this way, he would get some much-needed counselling, 3 years no contact with me, 3 years sexual offence counselling, and 3 years of checking in with a probation officer. This way, I can at least hope he will come out understanding that what he did was unacceptable, and fingers crossed he will never do it again to another living being. I knew there was no chance of rehab in jail. During the hearing, I of course was nervous. I didn't want to see Chris, but I knew whatever I was feeling, he was feeling 1,000 times worse. I didn't have to go, but knew I would regret it if I didn't. With my fiancé Johnny at my side, I watched as he got up in front of the judge after he cried in the courtroom, and agreed to the terms of his sentence. His mum glared at me the whole time, as though this was all my fault. So that's where he gets it from. It was 1990. I was 13 years old. It was a Friday night and my parents went out for the evening. They were visiting an aunt's house which was about 45 minutes away. My best friend was staying the night and we were upstairs chilling in my room. Now the bedroom I was in had previously been my sister's just a few weeks prior. She moved in with a friend, so I jumped on the chance to get a big room. It was on the second floor with 2 windows, one on the front of the house and another on the side next to the chimney. My back was to the side window when she screamed a horrible scream. I turned and looked. She's yelling that there was a man in the window. She saw his face, and he had his hands on the windowsill. I questioned what she saw because, hello, we're on the second floor. About 10 seconds later, my dog starts going off downstairs. Our house was positioned weirdly. We were right around a bend in the road on a very steep hill with a thick forest about 20 feet from the back of the house. There was a large deck that ran the stretch of the house with a door to the kitchen on one end and a set of French doors going into the family room on the other. We got a lot of animals on the deck, so I tried to write his barking off as a possum. No dice. He's running back and forth across the back of the house chasing something. It's pitch black, and I'm not going downstairs to turn on the outside light. Then it didn't matter. The dog was at the front door freaking out. So I did the stupidest thing you can imagine. I went for my dad's gun that he kept in his sock drawer, but it wasn't there. I was afraid to call the police, because if it was a false alarm, my dad would have literally beat the crap out of me. So I called my neighbor. He was an FBI agent, and for some reason I thought that made him cop-like. I told him the brief rundown, and that we were all home alone. In a span of about 5 minutes, I had finally realized I needed to call my parents. No one answered. So we made arrangements for my friend's mum to get us so that I could stay over there. I was not staying in the house alone. A few minutes later, my neighbor knocked on the door. He said that as he was walking to the yard, a car peeled right out of the bend. There was no street parking, so whoever it was didn't live nearby. There was also a parking lot across from where they were. He said he would talk to my parents when they got home and would look around the yard the next day. Finally, my friend's mum arrived about 20 minutes later. I left a note, loved my dog, locked up, and took off. The next day, my dad was pissed. He said my friend made it up for attention, and I blew it out of proportion. He was such a nice guy. The neighbor came back over and looked around. He mentioned some holes that were under the window next to the chimney. That's when my dad began to take it seriously. He immediately starts inventorying belongings, and we start inspecting the house thoroughly. I found pry marks on the front door. We seldom use it, so he wouldn't have noticed right away. But little else. Now, I didn't tell him about the gun because I assumed he moved it, and if he knew I went looking for it, he'd certainly beat me. Well, he didn't know it was missing, and flipped his lid. He then went through his important paperwork and discovered that several credit cards were missing as well as some collectibles that were stashed in his closet. We inventoried our belongings. My mom was missing some jewelry and I was missing all my Z Cavachi clothes, as well as some knickknacks. The cops were called and a report was filed. It took a few days, but he was able to get his info on the charges made to one of the cards. It took a week to get all the statements. There were charges for jewelry, clothing, alcohol, and the one that stood out were lots of baby supplies, including a crib. All the clues led to one person, an old friend of my sister that she had recently started hanging out with again. She was pregnant. There was a family meeting and my sister says that she lent her car to the girl a few times while she was at work. Our dad had her call the girl and tell her that if she confesses to what she did, he wouldn't press charges against her. She admits to copying the house and car keys, and she borrowed the car. While everyone was gone, her and some friends came in and took things. She didn't know about the gun, or that something happened that one night. It seems her friends were coming back without her. I'm trying to remember if she got in trouble or not, but I know a few of her friends got arrested. They changed the locks, added a keypad on the garage, and my dad started setting booby traps. The worst trap was a series of razor blades that he duct taped around the doorknobs. That one almost caught me sneaking in one night. I was working on a mine site that was shut down from production because the resources we were mining dropped steeply in price. On night shift, there were 2 blokes in the plant, a guy running the powerhouse about a kilometre away and me, security/medic, and the only lady, of course, all alone in the gatehouse. The site itself was about 1.5 hours from civilization, and even when I was on day shift, it still gave me the heebie-jeebies. There was no toilet in my office/gatehouse/medical center, so I would have to walk across to the adjacent administration building, turn on all the lights, and walk all the way through it to use the ladies. I had worked in this field for a while at this point, at many different sites, and I had never been worried or frightened before, even when wandering around at night on my own. My desk had a window which had direct view across the access road to the site, and as I'm sitting on my computer, I see movement from the corner of my eye. There's a man walking down the access road towards the gatehouse at 3 a.m. My spidey sense is screaming at me, but I don't falter. I email the powerhouse and advise that I have someone at the gate, and can they call in and check in on me in about 5 minutes, and open the service window to talk to my visitor. As he gets about 20 meters from the gatehouse, he vanishes. I crap my pants, lock all the things and call the plant, asking for one of the guys to come over, but not telling him why. He arrives and can clearly see I've shaken, and tell him what I've just seen. "Oh, that's just Dave." "Dave? Who the hell is Dave?" "He's that Bicky bloke that died in the crib room. Didn't anyone tell you the story?" Well, no, they hadn't, and assuming he was just trying to freak me out, I conducted a little Google investigation, and sure enough, a man was shot nearby and was brought by his friend to the site for help, and he died in the crib room. For the uninitiated, the crib room is the lunchroom. So now I don't pee for my whole 12-hour shift, and close all the blinds. On my next swing, as this was a fly-in, fly-out job, I came in on day shift, and I'm doing the rosters. The night shift medic tells me in no uncertain terms, "Don't ever put me on the night shift here again. I refuse to do them." He wouldn't tell me why. "It's okay, mate." I saw him too. Just shut the blinds from now on. My dad told me this story once. One night, his friend is drunk at a bar down the street from where my dad lived. He called my dad at 2 a.m. and asks if he can walk to his house and sleep on the couch because he was way too drunk to drive. My dad says it's fine and tells him the front door is unlocked. The next morning, my dad wakes up to go to work and his friend is nowhere to be found. He figures he got a ride home or waited somewhere else to sober up instead. When he goes outside, he sees 3 cop cars in front of his neighbor's house. Apparently his friend forgot which house was his. He walked into the other house, stripped down naked, and went to sleep on their couch. The neighbor's kids found him there next morning. My dad corroborated his story and they didn't press charges because the neighbor recently lost a close friend to a drunk driving accident. I met this guy in a nightclub, and he seemed nice enough. Good-looking, friendly. We exchanged numbers, and at the end of the night, I looked forward to meeting him again. Nothing unusual. I was 18 and he was in his early 20s. I spent a lot of time in the clubs, so I was comfortable with everything. About a week passed and we had sent a few texts and decided to meet for a drink. He offered to pick me up from my house, but as I didn't know him well, I arranged to meet him by the entrance to a hotel on the main road near my house. We went to a pub. I had plans to meet friends at about 9, so we only stayed an hour and he took me to where I was meeting my friend. We had a short kiss, then left. I was glad it was over, as he was actually not interesting, boring in fact. He added me on Facebook and I accepted, but didn't think we'd talk much after that. But I was very wrong. A month or so passed after this, and we didn't meet again until one night in town, where we met by chance. He told me he couldn't stop thinking about me. I was drunk and foolishly kissed him, and we parted ways again. Some days later, it says on Facebook that he is in a relationship. At least this meant he wasn't interested in me anymore, I thought. However, it was not long after this that he sent me a text that read, "I'm obsessed with you." I told him to stop at this point, as he had a girlfriend. He passed it off as being flirty, and told me to get over it. For about 6 months after this, every few weeks he would text me. After the first time this happened, he sent incredibly graphic details of how he wanted to do me. I deleted him on Facebook, and kept asking him to stop. Sometimes he would include naked pictures too. Keep in mind, I never got further than a kiss with this guy. He texted me once about 10 months into his relationship while on holiday with his girlfriend, and told me he wished it was me, not her. Again, I told him to stop. Each time I turned him down, he'd get annoyed and tell me he never wanted to speak with me again. But sure enough, it was actually less than a month, and I'd get a random naked picture or something. All the messages I could have ignored, but one night I hadn't heard from him in a few weeks, and I was home alone. My parents were on holiday. I hadn't told anyone that, and about 1 a.m. my phone rings. It's him. So I hang up. These are the text messages that followed. "Hey, let me in. I'm outside your house." "No, you're not. Leave me alone." "I am. I know you're alone. Let me in." And then he described some stuff he wanted to do with me. "Leave me the hell alone. I'm not home alone anyway. You're wrong. You don't even know where I live." "I do. I'm outside your house. Your room is the one with the red curtains." This was an accurate fact. "No, it isn't. You've never been to my house. I picked you up the first time we went out. From somewhere about a 10-minute walk away. You've never been to my house." I looked out my bedroom window, and there was no one to be seen. "I just saw your curtains move. Let me in." I ran around the house and turned on all the lights at the front. I don't know why. I guess I thought it would put him off. "You just turned the lights off. I know you're there." I was crying a lot at this point, and the last text I sent was, "Leave right now, or I'm calling the police. If I ever see you, hear from you, or have any contact with you again, I will call them." His reply, "You don't need to be a witch about it. I'll go." I didn't hear from him again, but that whole thing lasted almost 2 years from just one very short date. I still get really nervous when I see someone who looks similar now. I still don't know how he knew where my house was, or that my parents were away that night. I can only assume he followed me. When I was about 14, my parents left me alone overnight for the first time. I grew up in a small farming community, so my parents really had nothing to worry about. They left, and I decided to take an awesome bubble bath and paint my nails like all girls everywhere, obviously. While I was in the bath, I heard our back door open. I thought I was hearing things, and besides, I had locked all the doors per my mum's orders. Then, I heard the kitchen floor squeaky spot. I didn't know what to do, so just went under the bubbles and left my head out. I saw 2 shoes through the crack between the door and floor, and I could hear a person breathing. They stood there for about 30 seconds and walked away. I heard the door slam, but I didn't move. I stayed there until the water was freezing and cried. Then I got out, called my grandma, and checked the doors. The back door was unlocked, and the lock hadn't been messed with or broken. Later that week, we learnt a man was breaking into farmhouses. I was a kid, perhaps 8 or 9 at the time. My family and I decided to go to Swiss Chalet for dinner. My Canadian friends will know what this is, but for the rest of you, it's a rotisserie chicken restaurant, which was normal for us, so that's not the creepy part. I ended up taking a bathroom break and had to use the only stall there. When I got inside, no one else was there, and I was on my lonesome. A few minutes pass and another man enters, an older fella judging from his steps, and I could make out his shoes. They were typical black, boxy-looking dress shoes. As he got inside the bathroom, he was whistling and singing along to the song playing over the speaker. So far, everything was fine. He went over to one of the two urinals, used it, began washing his hands, and then out of nowhere started swearing profusely. And what felt like was directed at me, saying all kinds of lovely things, which, by the way, were not part of the song. Now, I was a very shy kid, so this kind of thing was awful for me. First of all, I'm in a store by myself, which was already scary enough at that age. It gets worse if someone else is inside with me. And then I have this happen to me too? That's a big no-no. The guy was swearing for what felt like ages. Possibly a good 5 minutes. Not to mention his voice became very hoarse, and all of a sudden, when he was swearing, he sounded slightly demonic, but almost whispering. I couldn't do anything and ended up pulling my feet up towards me to try and hide and prevent myself from crying. I felt helpless, and like I was going to be hurt. Finally, he stopped and left, only to literally come back in for a second to say one last string of lovely things about me. I stayed in the store for a good 10 to 15 minutes just to make sure he wouldn't return. I finished, cleaned up as fast as I could, and exited the bathroom. I looked left and right before leaving to check to see if anyone was there, and then quickly ran back to my table. I asked my dad if he had entered the bathroom, and he quickly replied no. At first, I actually thought it was him based on the shoes, but my dad's was slightly different. I quickly told them what happened, clearly distressed, but they kind of laughed it off and thought nothing of it. We finished eating and left. I had a quick glance at the restaurant to see if anything stood out to me, but nothing, or rather no one did. Everything seemed normal. We left the restaurant, and it's safe to say I was very scared about going into that bathroom alone again for a good year after that. Thankfully, nothing ever did happen again. This happened to my sister about 15 years ago, when she was in high school and I was in middle school. Our mum worked as a house cleaner and always became good friends with everyone whose home she cleaned. One of the homes was owned by an older couple who had no kids but had a huge house and a really nice pool that they always invited me and my siblings to come swim in. The husband worked as the COO of a large airline company, and they lived in a really nice neighborhood with a large lot of forest of trees. When you were in their backyard, you couldn't see any other houses at all, just trees. It felt really secluded and almost spa-like, with a waterfall and a short iron fence, so you had a good view of it. The house was really angular and architecturally interesting, with multiple levels made from stone walls, even on the inside. Pretty much every room had huge floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the backyard and gave great views during the day. At night, however, the reflection from inside lights prevented you seeing out, so it was always a little unnerving to walk by them since you couldn't see what was outside. The couple also decorated with old Native American art and masks, which was a little creepy to a middle schooler. But the couple wasn't creepy in themselves, so I wasn't too scared. They had an older golden retriever called Samson that lived up to his name and was a massive but sweet dog with a gentle temperament. They also had recently rescued a husky mix called Sadie, who was quite the opposite. Psycho Sadie, as we lovingly called her, had intense separation and stranger anxiety, and would destroy the house if left alone inside, jump their short fence if left out, and if they took her with them to run errands, she'd destroy the car and howl non-stop until they returned. So since they were wealthy and had the extra money, they would pay for me or my sister come over and dog sit while they were out. We were getting paid $20 an hour, and we were always excited to go over there and just watch their cable and swim in their awesome pool. Normally everything would be fine and both dogs would just lay around, but occasionally Sadie would realize I was a stranger and go nuts and start barking at me. One time she backed me into a corner and wouldn't stop barking, and I watched her eyes literally turn red. I was convinced she was going to attack me, but she eventually calmed down. After I got up on a couch and showed her how big, or not, I was, but I digress. This particular incident happened over Easter weekend while the homeowners were out of town for 2 days. They were paying my sister to stay there over the weekend, and I stayed with her the first night because it was a big house and kind of scary to stay there all alone. So we stayed up late watching chick flicks and eating junk food. The next day we swam in their pool, hung out a bit, but for some reason I didn't spend the night again, and I'm so glad I didn't, because what happened that night scarred my sister for life. It all started when my sister was working out on their treadmill. Their workout room was on the bottom floor of the home, which was a walkout basement. Just outside the room was a huge sliding glass door that opened onto their patio and pool. She had the TV on in their workout room, watching the Ten Commandments, that is always on the night before Easter. As she was running, she thought she heard the house alarm beep, like it did whenever a door opened. She stopped the treadmill, and went to look around and saw the sliding glass door was open. Now this door is huge, and there is no way it could have just opened by itself, so she was instantly freaked. However, the dogs were just laying there in the workout room, and she figured they would have gotten up to investigate had someone come in, since those are the kind of instincts that the dogs have, especially Sadie, as she hated strangers. So she made excuses that she had accidentally left it open and simply must have imagined the beep of the alarm, and how it must have been either the TV or the treadmill. She closed and locked the door and went back to working out, but a few minutes later she had the distinct feeling of someone watching her. She looked around but didn't see anyone. She finished her workout but couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, so she decided to just go to bed because she was a little creeped out and wanted to forget about it. She went around and made sure all the doors were locked. The owners didn't give her the alarm code so she couldn't set it, and she took a shower and locked herself in the guest room with both dogs just in case, and eventually they fell asleep. Some hours later she awoke to both dogs growling at the door of the room. Now it was fairly normal for Psycho Sadie to growl and bark at nothing, but Samson had never barked or showed any signs of aggression before, and immediately my sister knew something was up. She was shaking and trying to convince herself that the dogs had just heard an animal, and that it was nothing. But then she heard that dreadful door alarm beep. She called my dad in a panic, crying and screaming, and he told her to hang up and call the police while he was on his way. She called the cops and my dad made the 15-minute drive in under 5, and when she opened the bedroom door to let my dad in the house, the dogs took off running and barking through the house and downstairs to the basement. My sister ran screaming all the way through the house to the front door to let my dad in, and he took a quick look around the upstairs levels with his gun but didn't see anything unusual. The police arrived a few minutes later and looked around and found that the back gate was open, as well as the sliding glass door again, but not enough to let the dogs out. Just barely, like it had been slammed shut and bounced back a little. They said it looked like someone had entered the home through the sliding glass door because the lock had been tampered with, but they were determined that whoever did it hadn't stolen or disturbed anything. When my dad asked why someone would break in and not do anything, especially with the dogs locked up, the police said that they had been notified by the homeowners earlier that month that the husband had received a death threat because of some decisions he made at his job that put a lot of people out of work. They had gone to the police about it, but didn't bother to tell my sister to keep an eye out for anything suspicious. Thanks a lot for the heads up. Needless to say, we never dog sat for them again, and they moved out of state within a few months because he lost his job, and he deserved it. Worst spa ever. After my grandfather died, my father's mother remarried, and all intents and purposes they had a very happy life together. Occasionally her second husband would be inclined to tell us some things he'd seen. He had run away from home and had worked in the north and a lumberjack camp. Around the turn of the 20th century he joined the Marines. He held the Golden Globes, 1936 to 38. He was okay though. Just like everyone, he had a job, and he was a security guard for a number of years and worked regularly for a company. He was fairly good, and it kept him actively employed. He boxed professionally, and his gig between fights was security guard work. 1 week he was either on vacation or work was slow. So, he was at home, and the owner of ACME Coffin Company called him, and the man mentioned that he got his number from his supervisor, and he had heard some good things about him, and was going to give him a chance to make some extra money. It was a good deal, so he thanked him and gave his manager a call. "Yes, I know the man I spoke up for you. You're off this week, and you're going to get paid in cash, so go ahead and make some money." Great. He called the man back and said okay, that he would work this week. The guy told him what time he needed to be there, and they agreed on a price, and he was there the next night or two. He was working the night shift. All he had to do was make his rounds. He's working his night. It's going fairly smoothly, as he's at his desk filling out his paperwork when all of a sudden he hears some racket in the warehouse, and goes out and he investigates, shining his light. But there's nothing, just racket. He walks away and coughs it up to being really tired, as his normal shifts are daytime, and he goes back to the office behind his desk and does more paperwork. Then there's a bigger commotion, so he heads back out to the warehouse and starts making his rounds. He goes down the rows of coffins and he sees a lid start moving by itself. But there's nothing there. No animals, nothing. The lid is just moving. It moves off the coffin and then it moves back. He gets antsy. When he did the second time, it was normal for his rounds. So he stays out there and is just looking at the coffins, and he notices it a few more times. When he goes back into the office, he calls the man and lets him know he's grateful for the opportunity for work, but that after this shift he will not return. My sister's boyfriend's sister, yeah, you heard that right, lived in an apartment with a few of her other girlfriends. Some ball or late night party came around, but she decided to not go, and ended up being home alone. She went to sleep but was awoken when she heard the front door unlock, accompanied by some footsteps. She thought it was just her friends coming back from the party, but kind of freaked out when the persons came into her room and started rummaging around in her drawers. Burglars. She peeked out, pretending to be asleep, not wanting to get into any trouble, and to just let them take some weird pervy stuff, like jewelry maybe, and stay safe. As they were about to leave, one of them, the only one, she wasn't sure how many people it was, crouched down next to her bed and said, "I know you're not sleeping, princess," and left the apartment. I used to work for a relatively small security company. It was privately owned and had about 30 employees in total. They'd get a contract with a factory, and then basically your job was to sit in that factory for 8 to 12 hours when no one was working in it. So I'd be working by myself alone overnight, in a completely empty factory. In my 2 years of doing that job, I never one time saw a single thing I would call supernatural. However, I did see Dennis. One night my captain calls me on the phone and tells me a new trainee will be coming in at about 5 a.m. and to show him the ropes, teach him how to make the rounds. So you walk around the building, and that's basically what making a round is. About 4:45, I step outside to the parking lot to have a smoke and wait on the new guy. About 10 minutes later, a car pulls up, stops, backs up and drives away. I was clearly visible, so I have no idea why he left, but the car passed by around 3 or 4 more times before finally pulling in and shutting off the engine. I could see him in the car, and he's just sitting in the driver's seat staring at me. In the back seat are 2 kids, probably around 6 to 8. After about 3 minutes of me wondering what the hell's going on, he gets out of the car. Dennis is messed up looking. He's about 4'10", and fatter than damn near anyone I've ever seen. He has a huge rash covering about 70% of his body, with a white crust outlining most of it. Then he speaks. "Had a little trouble finding the place." His voice is high-pitched, I mean really high-pitched. I'm talking Judge Doob in the final scene of Who Framed Roger Rabbit high-pitched. Then he extends his hand to shake mine. Without thinking much, I shake it. There's 1 finger on it. 1. The rest of his hand looks like some kind of stumpy flesh mitten. Then one of the kids gets out of the car, has the same rash, is also very fat, and is also missing fingers. He says, "Daddy, can I get a drink?" Dennis turns around and screams in that high-pitched voice to get back in the car. I'm shocked. So I take the guy around the factory, show him the perimeter, tell him where the emergency stuff is, and about a minute into our walk, I notice this guy smells like hell. I mean, he literally reeks of bull sweat and fresh diarrhea. The whole time, he's asking me strange questions like, do I have a crush on anyone that works here? Or can he hunt on this property? He finally leaves after standing in the office, trying to make small talk with me for about 15 minutes. On his way out, he said, "We're going to be good friends, even if you don't think so now." I went home about 2 hours later and stood in the shower for a good hour washing myself, trying to get the image of the guy out of my head. I called my captain and asked him to reassign me to someplace else. Never had to see him again. It's been more than 10 years, and it still bothers me. I also want to note that I don't have any problems or issues with anyone with a disability, but Dennis was something else. I was with my girlfriend at the time, chilling in the basement garage, listening to music, having drinks, and I go up to the kitchen, looking for my phone but can't find it. I had a few drinks, so I must have misplaced it somewhere. No biggie. I see my girlfriend's phone was charging, so I pick it up to check the time. Then I go down to the basement garage. Later on in the night, she goes up to the kitchen upstairs looking for her phone but can't seem to find it. We both go upstairs. We both had had a few drinks and ended up going to bed. Next morning, I'm looking for my phone. She's looking for hers, but we can't find them. Weird, since I'd seen her phone the night before. Then I notice my watch isn't where I left it. She looks outside to the backyard and sees her purse and my work computer lying on the grass. It then hit us. Someone had entered the house while we were downstairs in the basement garage. And not only that, they were hiding when I came up to get my phone, since I had to check hers, and it was missing the morning after. Guess it goes without saying that I changed all the locks, put motion detector lights in the backyard, and put a locked fence. One thing is to be robbed. Another thing is to be robbed when you're in the house. One semester in college, I had an 8 a.m. class, and I was still living with my mum. At the time, I was only 17, and I'm a smaller girl, standing at 5'3". I went to my morning class and didn't have any classes after, so decided to pick up breakfast for my mum and myself. I pulled into the IHOP parking lot and parked and began to order online. For some explanation of this IHOP, it's off a major highway, and there's nothing else but hotels around it, but it was really the only way home. I order online, and it says it will take about 30 minutes, so I hunker down and get comfortable. About 10 minutes, a guy in an old black pickup truck pulls into this parking spot across from me. I noticed after a few minutes that he is just staring at me, and not discreetly with sunglasses or anything, it's really obvious. I just try and ignore and keep watching the videos on my phone and making sure my doors are locked. After about a half hour, I get up and leave my car and realize I have to walk by this truck to get to the door of the IHOP. I take my keys with me, and obviously they had pepper spray on them. And as I get out of my car, I walk past the bed of the truck and hear the guy exit. I was a bit of a walk from the front door, so I spared a glance behind me and see the guy speeding up, walking straight at me. I freak out because no other people are in the parking lot, and you can't see the door from where we were, so I start running to the door of the IHOP and he runs right behind me. But thankfully, I made it to the door just before he reached me. The IHOP had 2 sets of doors, where one is on the right and the other, with a little waiting area in between. And as I get inside the second set of doors to the main area to pick up my food, the guy stops right outside the outer doors and just stares. I'm totally freaked out. But I go to the online order section and I'm trying to figure out how I'm gonna leave when the older lady behind the desk asks if I'm alright. She looks where the guy is still standing right at me outside and says he'll walk me out. Even a complete stranger could tell how creepy he was being. She walks me out and watches me go to my car from the little outside waiting area, and the guy starts following me as soon as she leaves. I'm thankful that I was already in my car, that he was running to get to his. But as I pull out, he tries to follow my car. I ended up driving around for a while to lose him because he kept following me, and I didn't want him seeing where I lived. I have a very conspicuous car, so I was quite worried about it, because it would take me about 10 minutes of driving on the interstate to lose him. The worst part was my breakfast was cold by the time I got to eat it. I took my dog out in my backyard on her leash late one night. I had turned off the motion sensor light several days before, so it was pitch black back there, and my eyes had not yet adjusted. As we walked past a bush, my dog started going nuts, growling and barking. I let her retractable leash out a bit, and all of a sudden I see movement in the leaves. Something very large slowly started crawling out towards me and getting up. At first I just thought it was a big dog, but it was too large. My heart started pounding in my chest as it continued getting up higher and higher, now to the height of a deer or larger animal. As my eyes were adjusting to the darkness, it appeared human-like. I had literally just finished watching an episode of True Blood with a guy who turns from a dog into a man, so I thought I was freaking out at this point. Once the creature is standing fully upright and stumbling forwards, he starts speaking. "Keep your dog back." At this point I realized it's a man who was hiding or passed out in my bushes. My adrenaline and fear are so strong I put my arm up to his face. He staggers and stumbles and puts his arms up to protect his head, all the while apologizing and trying to keep back from my dog. I demand to know what the hell he's doing in my yard, and he begins crawling around, telling me he lost his keys back there and was looking for them. I walk towards him to kick him, and he slowly stumbles out of the front of my house and down the street. I went inside to call the police and spent the rest of the night making sure he did not return. This happened 2 years ago. I was with my current armed security company. We had a shopping center in our portfolio in the suburb of Rockrimmton, Colorado Springs. In the shopping center was an old, closed-down McDonald's. Local legend is that this McDonald's was haunted. Dead former employees, Indian burial ground, cursed. The story varied from high school to high school, and growing up a few miles away, everyone knew the legend. My company started providing services to the whole shopping center due to teens hanging around after hours, homeless camping in front of the shops, and in the self-service car wash. But this McDonald's was abandoned, had been closed for a long time, and sometimes we would have to respond to calls from the property manager about wannabe ghost hunters or Wiccans trying to get in to do what have you. Well, one night in August, while training a new hire, we were walking around looking for kids and homeless, when from the car wash we heard an ear-shattering scream from inside the McDonald's. We run straight over, flashlights and guns drawn, scanning every corner of the exterior structure. We had no key to access the inside, but were permitted to enter if someone had forced their way in. But there was no sign of an entry. No damage, and the fire ladder to the roof was still up. So confused, we looked at each other, wondering how a scream could have come from inside. The new guy was fresh from the army, and was new to the area, so he'd never heard the story. I began telling him every version I knew, while he kept shining his light through the window to see if anyone was inside. While on the last iteration involving the Indian burial ground, the new guy yelled out in the least manliest scream I've ever heard. Without the words finding their way out, he just pointed to a window. I looked in from where he was standing, and standing in the opposite side of the store from the window stood a shady mass about 6 foot tall with large white eyes. It stood there examining us for a brief moment, then darted into the back kitchen area. I grabbed the new guy by his shirt and started running to the back door on the opposite side of the building, thinking some prankster would run out. But no, The door was padlocked from the outside. We called the property manager and the CSPD out to search the building. When the property manager arrived and opened the door for the cops to clear the building, he came over and asked, "Saw it, did ya?" 3 of the CSPD officers came out within a few minutes saying nothing was inside. We got a call screen number for our report and went on to the next patrol property. For the rest of the night, the new guy was very quiet, saying very little, and after his first solo night on patrol, he ended up quitting the next day. No resignation, said very little, handed over his uniform and equipment. And to this day, I don't know why he quit, and he wouldn't speak to anyone on staff after departing. So, I wonder if that figure with the large white eyes still haunts him. A few years ago, my boyfriend and I went on an impromptu road trip. We packed up the car and the dogs and drove up to the far northern California redwoods. I was somewhat familiar with the area from the time I was a kid, and it seemed very adventurous just heading out with a true destination in mind. A couple of nights in, we ended up meeting up a friend of a friend, grabbing some drinks, and she invited us to crash at her house for the night. We happily took her up on the offer, because it saved us from dropping money on a motel or trying to find a camping spot. She lived in a super cool looking old Victorian house. Our friend normally had 6 roommates, including several guys, but since it was summertime, and most of them were students, it was only her and another female roommate plus us for the night. We drank some beers and hung out, and then went to crash. Both roommates were upstairs, and my boyfriend and I, with our dogs, were crashing on a futon downstairs in a room that was right in the front of the house, off the front door. It was kind of a sitting room with a fireplace, and big bay windows looking out to the front yard, which had a good cover of bushes. We both fell asleep easily, and were in deep sleep until we were suddenly awoken by the doorbell ringing. Now this is an old Victorian house, so it has an old school, deep ringing doorbell that you hear throughout the house. One of the residents of the house came down and opened the door, and looked out to see nothing, so she went back upstairs to bed. My boyfriend and I thought it was kind of weird, but not our house, maybe late night visitors were common. We fell back asleep and were then awoken again sometime later by the doorbell. We heard the roommate come down again and look outside the door and shut it. This time, she walked into the room after and asked if we heard the doorbell, and we could tell she'd been weirded out. We told her not to open the door if it happened again, and all came to the conclusion it must be the doorbell malfunctioning. The roommate goes back upstairs and we fall asleep. Next, I wake up to one of my dogs growling the most deep-throated growl I've ever heard. He absolutely loves people, even if they're strangers, and we live in downtown of a pretty major city, so having him growl at something at night is not normal. We chalk it up to being in an unfamiliar house and tell him to be quiet. I fell asleep again. Next thing I know, I wake up to my boyfriend jumping out of bed and literally smacking the big bay window about 5 feet away from our bed and yelling. There's a man's face standing in the window staring at us. My boyfriend immediately grabbed an axe, as we'd been camping and it was right at hand, and chased the guy down the street. I'm pretty sure that creep must have crapped his pants. The whole commotion woke up everything, and we stayed up for the rest of the night keeping guard. The scariest thing to me is that the guy was probably casing the house and wanted to rob it. There's no reason for him to ring the doorbell multiple times. He wanted to see if it was only the girl's home, depending on who came to the door, and it gives me chills just thinking about it. A few years back, before I started dating my fiancée, I worked at IHOP. We had a new manager, and she was awesome. She was almost like a big sister. We had this table of semi-regulars, 2 guys old enough to be my dad. One started hitting on me and asking my manager about me. At this point I'd been single for a while, and she told him to ask me out himself. She meant no harm. So I guess he was alright, attractive enough for his age. He asked me out, and to be polite I said he could just leave his number. I felt uncomfortable but didn't think too much of it. The next weekend he came in and requested my section. I was busy and mostly just went about my business. He asked me a few times why I never called, and I kept responding that I was busy with my 2 jobs and young daughter. So the next week he comes again and requests my section, asking why I never called. I told him once again I'd been busy and was starting to feel uncomfortable. I'd ignored them that day until it was time for the check. They paid, and I thought I had seen the last of him that day. I went over and started talking to my co-worker, when all of a sudden I feel arms around my waist from behind me, and before I could react he kissed me on the side of my face, told me he'd see me soon and left me standing in shock. He came in the next weekend and asked to sit in my section. I panicked. It's probably worth noting I'm a victim of domestic violence from a previous relationship, which made the situation worse. I don't like people touching me, especially people I don't know, and I told my boss I couldn't take the table and why. He kicked them out and told them to never return. The creeper flipped me off on his way out. When I was 17, I worked as a busboy at the high-end country club restaurant. It was the sort of place where people paid all-inclusive yearly memberships. They could roll into the restaurant after 9 holes, stuff their faces and get wasted, and then head back out for more grass hockey. Anyway, policy was that the restaurant closes when all members are finished. This could mean you have to leave at 9 p.m. or 2 a.m., depending on which members were hanging out. This could mean some late nights. One of the fun parts of the job was hopping into one of the staff carts and driving around the course to restock all the snack shacks. These were the little stalls that had sodas, chocolates, and other miscellaneous crap that you could jam into your face while watching a buddy 8 strokes deep in a bunker. Late one night after a wedding reception, and after we fed and shot the shit with the band, I got shack duty. Everyone else was busting ass on cleanup and next day prep, so I went solo. I was stoked. It was accepted practice to nab a few bars for oneself while doing the rounds, so I hopped into a cart and headed onto the course. At this point it was getting close to 3 a.m. So I'm not sure if you've ever been out on an unlit golf course at 3 a.m, but it's a little surreal. It's not like you're in the wild, everything is two smooth lines and picturesque, but you are far away from everything. A lot of fencing to help keep up critters and people too. Never really had any concerns about being there late at night. Except this time. I'm at hole 6, heading up to the snack shack, like a porta-potty-sized pantry, in the cart, when the door, only closed by staff at night, locked in off-season, slams shut. Before I can really react, someone screams from inside, "I will kill you." So I lose my crap and beeline back to the resto at the cart stop full speed, crapping brakes and attempting not to think about getting shot in the back. By the time I get back, I've convinced myself it's a prank and everyone is going to be laughing at me. But my boss sees my face. I tell him what happened and he tells me only a few people haven't clocked out and that it's not staff. Police come out, take statements and search the shack. All the food and soda is gone. The interior is plastered with crap and blood, and random letters are found on the wall. They found a hole dug under the perimeter fence, and I stopped doing night runs to the snack shack. They tore that one down. Good times. Can't see anything without golf without thinking about it. A few years ago, my husband worked night shift. He typically got home around 6 a.m. and worked a 45-minute drive away. One night I decided to let my 2 kids watch a movie in my bed on the laptop. It was already fairly late, around 10 p.m, so I figured they'd fall asleep and they could just stay in my bed that night. I locked up the whole house. Everyone got ready for bed and we started the movie. About 40 minutes into it, I heard someone walk through the dining room. My room is directly off the dining room, and it has hardwood flooring, so it's pretty easy to hear footsteps. I leave the dining room light on for my husband, so I had my door closed almost all the way, save for an inch to block the light. I figured he'd come home early, and continued watching the movie. After 5 minutes of hearing someone walk back and forth across the dining room, and he hadn't come in, I decided to find out what's up, paused the movie, and told the kids to stay put and open the door. The footsteps immediately stopped, and no one was there. I looked all over the house, checking every window, closet, and outside door. Everything was still locked, and nothing was out of place. Then I heard a meow and laughed at myself for freaking out over a cat, until I walked into the kitchen to feed him, and he was sitting outside on the back porch. The door was still locked. Then my husband called from work 45 minutes away. He said to make sure I locked up, because a neighbor had their house broken into a few streets over earlier that day. I lost it and started crying. I was terrified. This happened to me many years ago when I was 18. I was on one of my first jobs. They didn't really pay much, and it was part-time but perfect for a student. The job was in an old cinema that was being removed and demolished, and they hired us to prevent theft at night. It was a conflict zone. My work consisted of watching some monitors and making rounds every hour. Simple stuff. You had to go through some areas, do a few checkpoints, and the cinema was old, from the early 70s. The basement was nothing special, but it wasn't nice. It was dimly lit, and quite long, at least 50 to 80 meters long, with a width of about 2 persons on average. There were doors at the left side every 5 meters. In this zone, we had to make sure that every door was locked and continue to the next door until the end. Well, I was there checking the doors one by one, and at the end, when I checked every single door, did I understand that everything was fine, and I started to take the stairs to return with my partner. The moment I took the first step, I heard a clear sound, which, to me, sounded like the door opening. Something quite remarkable given the shape of the connector, and the fact that at night sound travels extremely loud and quickly. I turned, and can see one of the first doors open very slowly. My first thought is that someone was inside and had pretended the door was locked. Nothing paranormal crossed my mind. Quickly I pulled the club out and began speaking to my partner via the walkie-talkie so he could come and support me. When I did, I started walking in the direction of the door as silently as possible, trying to hear anything from the inside of the room. Suddenly the light inside the room turned on. I'm now convinced there's someone inside. After what felt like an eternity, my partner comes running down without asking me any questions, as he understood that the door was open and the room had been turned on. We get together carefully towards the entrance of the room. There was no one inside. We checked every single centimeter in that room. Full of stuff from the cinema, spare seats, etc., but there was nothing. I remember how we sat in silence after we searched it profusely without finding anything, without understanding what the hell had just happened here. I grew up in a fairly big home. 7 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, 2 stories, and a guest house, all on about 5 acres. It was my parents, my 2 sisters, who both had babies at the time, my aunt and uncle and my grandma living with us. Everyone started moving out and finding their own place, so by the time this happened it was just me and my parents. My parents go out for the night, and I go to a friend's house. I get home around 7:30, and I know my parents don't plan on being home for at least a few more hours. I get home to the porch light and front hall light being turned on. As soon as you walk through the door, you could go straight into the living room, left to the bedrooms, or right to the kitchen. I decide to go right into the kitchen and make some dinner for myself. Then went into the living room to settle into some TV for a while. It's around 10ish, and I decide it's bedtime. So I shut off everything except a few lights so that my parents can see when they arrive home, and head upstairs to bed. There were 5 bedrooms downstairs and 2 upstairs, one of them being mine. It had a huge closet, bigger than most people's bathrooms, and it had its own bathroom, so plenty of places to hide in there. All the lights were turned off. I flicked on the lights to the stairwell, then walked up the stairs. I turned on the light between the bedrooms, which weren't very bright. Picture the glow of maybe one of those tap lights, and opened the door, as both were closed. The second room used to be my grandma's, but became a game room of sorts. Now my room was an odd setup. The closet door was right of where you walked in and had a separate light switch. Then the room itself had one light, and then the vanity on the wall had about 8 lights with all separate switches. So I flicked on the main light for the room, which usually wasn't enough to light up the whole room, but enough to let me get changed and go to bed, as my bed is directly under the switch. And suddenly, there he is. This kid sitting on my bed in complete darkness. He didn't say anything to me for a solid 30 seconds before I screamed and ran down the stairs. Then he ran home. I wish I could say that's the last experience I had with him. But there were more. As time passed, he'd come over to ring the doorbell and see if I were home, and would then just leave. He stole a lot of stuff from our house, mostly food, once my bike, a video game, some cash. I honestly have no idea where he's at now though. I moved out of that house years ago. He, as far as I learned, grew up in a poor family. His dad was in jail, his mum abandoned him with his elderly grandmother who didn't work, and they lived in the next house over, which was about 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom between his grandmother himself, his sister and the 3 cousins. The last I heard, he'd gotten arrested a few times for stealing from store shelves, and to keep him out of trouble they sent him to live in Washington with his aunt, who could keep a better eye on him. I'm 16. I hadn't had a job yet and I really wanted to work. I needed to get out of the house, so I got an interview at Popeyes in my city. I get there around 5 minutes before my interview. I have really bad social anxiety and struggle to speak in certain situations. By the time it was my turn to be interviewed, my nails had been gnawed off. I was very shaky, and I could hear it in my voice. I had been listening to what the previous girl had said. I like examples of what to say or do, so I thought I was ready. No masks were worn, mid-COVID, and this man did not put his on. Perhaps that was the first red flag. He was also looking toward places where I was trying to maintain eye contact. I was wearing one of my mum's cardigans, so I crossed it over my chest. When I did, his attention finally fell back to my face where it should have been, especially since I'm a minor, and he obviously knew that. He bit his lip a lot and would sigh weirdly. It was like a moan. Obviously uncomfortable, I tried to take his attention from me onto some random questions, and started to ask about the restaurant and stuff, but he answered very dismissively. In the end I get the job. I was told an email was going to be sent to me within the next day or 2 with my login so that I could start training. That is an important detail. I give it 2 days and I received nothing. I call and they tell me to call back in the next day at 3 because he's out of town. I go to high school full time and don't get out until almost 4. By the time I called, he had gone, and I called multiple other times to no avail. Finally, on the Saturday, he answers. He tells me how I was supposed to stay after the meeting to get my login info from the assistant manager. That's when I'd had enough. I'm already a very short-tempered person, and given this man every ounce that I had. I told him that I applied, and he said I was hired, and he said that I would receive the email with my info, and I wasn't given any other way to contact him. And I thought it was very unprofessional to lie to a new employee, and thought he was a bit of a creep. He tried cutting in, but I told him it was disgusting that he was focusing on my chest, especially as I was underage, during an interview. I told him I didn't want the job anymore, and to get lost, and hung up before he could say a word. Multiple emails after were sent, belittling me and some extremely unprofessional behavior. I blocked the sender's email and still continued to receive more. Multiple calls were also made to my own mother by this guy. We reported him, and thankfully he has since been fired. Note to all hiring managers, when you make a mistake, own up to it. Don't lie to a new employee. We aren't stupid. In the days before computers, I worked in the offices of a large moving/shipping warehouse. During summer, people move more than in winter. One summer night, my desk was piled high with papers, and I was working late. I clocked out at midnight and my mum had to come and pick me up. When I came out through the big glass double doors of the office to greet my mum, the doors did not lock behind me. I could not in good conscience leave the place with the door unlocked. I explained to my mum and I went back inside to find another human. The office was a 2-story building, so I started upstairs where I worked. There wasn't a soul there at midnight, so I jogged down the hallways looking for an open door, just hoping to find someone who was still on duty. I didn't want to have to go to the warehouse for the night watchman. It was a dark and creepy walk to get there. I moved downstairs and repeated the hallway jog, but there was nothing. Then I went into the break room. It smelled awful in there. There had been a glass coffee pot sitting on the burner at the end of the day shift. It had been there for 7 hours, evaporating the liquid into one solid black ash. I sat the pot in the dry sink, as the water would have surely broken it via thermoshock, and I turned off the heating element. I still needed to alert someone, anyone, about the front door situation because I had already taken so long. I wanted to give my mum an update. But this time, when I went through the front door, the doors locked behind me. Someone, or something, seems to have been watching over the business that night. When I was 10 years old, my parents bought a condemned house to be renovated by us. This would be a year-long process. When it came time to sign papers for the house, the former owner nonchalantly mentions that her brother, that has been in prison for 10 years, is about to get out of prison. His name is Jimmy. She said he had somewhat of a split personality. One moment he was an angel, and the next he had a shotgun pointed at your face. We did not know what to expect, and as a little boy I was a little nervous about it. And we were locked in the contract as we'd already signed the papers. Months had gone by, and we had been working at the house when all of a sudden one day we find that the driveway was barricaded and someone had crapped on our front porch. It was Jimmy. He had pulled all of our construction equipment in the driveway to block us and then pinched a loaf on our porch. We called the cops, had a restraining order put on him, and didn't see him for a while. Now, why was he in prison? He and a friend got drunk one night. His friend stated that he wanted to kill himself, and Jimmy said he would do it for him. So Jimmy found a stick and stabbed his friend and killed him. But it didn't end there. Jimmy poured wax over his friend's eyes, cut him into several pieces, and spread the body parts all over town we lived in. He also killed someone out of self-defense in prison. We had finished renovating our house and we all moved in. Jimmy hadn't shown up for a while, which is what creeped me out. I shared a room with my brothers. This room was near the front porch. My mind played with me for a solid year, and I barely slept because I thought Jimmy was outside my window just waiting to pour wax all over my eyes. A few more months go by, and Jimmy showed up one day. He wanted to come in and apologize for us for what he did to the house. My siblings and I are standing at the door watching my dad outside talking to him. My dad said no, of course, and told him to leave. That was the last time we ever saw Jimmy, though he never really did anything to hurt us. The thought is what scared me for the longest time. I'm a security guard. On a night many years ago in early November, I'm working at a meat packing plant, guarding the outside, making sure no one steals the cars or breaks windows, that sort of thing. The plant happens to be near a body of water, so shortly after nightfall, a fog bank rolls in. Now I've done work in fog before, It's not exactly pleasant, but who cares, right? I can still hear, and I know where everything is. So if someone tries to screw around, I'll hear them, even if I can't see them. But this fog was so thick I could literally not see further than maybe 15 feet in any direction. Total whiteout. Again, not fun, but nothing to write home about either. I'm halfway through my 0130 patrol when I think, geez, this is Silent Hill thick fog. My mind goes into overdrive, and suddenly every sound is a monster, every scrape is a killer with a knife. I spend the next 4.5 hours more terrified than I've ever been, and when my shift finally ends I have to drive home. There are no streetlights in that area, and I'm convinced at every second that I'm going to hit someone, or that someone is going to hit me. The very second I break free of the fog, I pulled over and took 20 minutes to stop shaking. I was staying over one night at a friend's house, back when I was in junior high. We heard some noise coming from behind the equipment shed and thought someone may be trying to steal tools. I grabbed a baseball bat and a flashlight while he picked up a hockey stick. We decided it would be best to sneak up on whoever was back there. As we rounded the corner, I aimed the flashlight at the presumed thief. To our surprise, 2 glowing eyes stared back at us. After a few terrified moments, it dawned on me that I was staring into the face of a mountain lion, one that was standing less than 10 feet away. I kept the flashlight trained on the mountain lion as we slowly backed around the corner again. We then ran like hell back into the house and sat down shaking for several minutes. The messed up thing is that I live in Vermont. They're supposed to be extinct up here. This was 22 years ago. Maybe some still survived back then. Moral of the story: don't bring a baseball bat to a mountain lion fight. I work in the middle of a Navajo reservation at a power plant. Naturally, it's kind of creepy driving to work at midnight, and I've seen a few things. One time it was raining. I was driving down the highway after leaving a gas station, jamming to some Ashley by Escape the Fate. My Spotify playlist is a very confusing place. I see headlights heading right at me. Me being me, I slam it, going at about 75 when suddenly the headlights veer off into the desert. But they were not headlights. They were just 2 orbs emitting light. They shot off into the desert, and I drove the rest of the way to work with my jaw dropped. On another night I was driving to work. It was about a 1/4 mile from the entrance to the power plant. There was a car behind me. We're going uphill doing about 40. This blue orb comes out of the desert and goes through my car. As I made contact, all my gauges dropped to 0. Battery, gas, RMP, MPH, temp, oil, everything. For what seemed like minutes, then suddenly everything came back and I drove to work. I told a co-worker, and he said he saw me coming up the hill, but my lights went out. The last light story. I was driving to work just the other day. When you're coming up the hill to work, you can see the whole stretch of the highway, which is about 5 miles from town. As I'm starting the hill climb, I notice a car coming up pretty fast behind me. I've got about pretty close. Then the right light went out, then the left, which would have meant it turned to the left. But if it took a right, it would have gone straight into the desert. Now, the building I work in is also part of the warehouse. A few people have perished in here. One night I was on lunch break. 15 minutes is more of a potty break, and was walking down the corridor and just past the women's bathroom. Out of the corner of my eye, I see a black figure standing in the doorway. My heart stops, but I keep walking. I know it's either my imagination, but I walk into the men's room, drop trow and start pooping. About 30 seconds into my poop, the door opens. It's 4 a.m. The warehouse is closed until 7 a.m, and I'm the only person back there. I hear footsteps walking, and an overwhelming smell of a spicy men's cologne with cigarettes. The footsteps got closer and stopped at the shower. Suddenly the lights go out and I pinched my turd, pulled everything up, didn't even tuck in my shirt and booked it out of there, and finished my poop in the bathroom where I work. Didn't go back there for a few months now. Now I poop back there every day and just keep a flashlight with me. One night when I was 11 years old, I was watching TV with my two older sisters of 13 and 15. Our parents were out later to party, but being home alone was nothing new to us. Just before 1 a.m. our dog stood up and left the family room and began to stare out the back door of the kitchen, just off the family room. A minute later he went absolutely crazy. It was not the typical barking sound or the growling of a stranger or cat. It was an insane mixture of incredibly loud barking and wild animal growling, the sound one would make in a truly life or death situation. This of course freaked the hell out of us. We went to our dog to comfort him, and after 20 seconds of discussion of what the hell was going on, we decided we had better secure the house as quickly as possible. It was a large house with many doors and windows to check. We all ran frantically to lock up everything as quickly as possible. The last door I got to was the garage door. A split second after locking it, I put my hand around the handle to verify it was locked, and felt someone on the other side viciously shaking the handle, pushing, trying to open the door. We of course made quite a few phone calls within the next few minutes. The memory of the feeling of the violent shaking, knowing the person my dog freaked out about, was 1 foot from me, on the other side, creeps the hell out of me even now. This was about 2 years ago. I work at a hair salon and a restaurant opened up next to our store. The food was good, and we would stop by there for lunch once in a while. Well, every now and then, the dishwasher would come up from the back of the restaurant to watch us. It didn't bother us, just watching. He always seemed kind of creepy to me from the get-go. He wore a big, clear apron around himself, like a raincoat top, and just looked grimy, with unkempt hair, dirty moustache, and really old. Well, one day I went in by myself, and was short on cash to get some extra chicken for my burrito, so I opted not to get it. I took my food and returned to the salon, when all of a sudden, one of the other employees came into the back and gives me a thing of chicken. The dishwasher guy came in, said he wanted you to have this. Great. I was kind of confused by this as the guy seemed strange. I didn't eat the chicken. Well, one day, I'm walking back to my car, and I noticed the cops around. Someone had got arrested in the parking lot. So I kinda tried to take my time getting in the car. Well, who walks up to me but the dishwasher guy? He tries to strike up a conversation with me. Him. How are you? How was work? You know why the cops are here? I gave him short answers. The kicker. Are you seeing anyone? Yes, I'm in a relationship with my boyfriend. I say it quickly, get into my car and leave. Figured it was the end, but nope. This is how our meetings went. He tried to talk to me, I'd get into my car, and he made sure to take the trash out the same time I did. I used to acknowledge him, wave once or twice, try to be nice, but it got so repetitive. He tried to watch me in the restaurant, like purposefully walk out of the back. I didn't go as often, or would have someone else pick me up my food. The big joke in the salon was my creepy boyfriend. We all joked about it. We all knew he put me on edge, but he hadn't done anything bad yet, so I tried ignoring him, and the jokes would continue. But it got stranger. He started watching me work from the salon window, after he'd take out the trash just standing there. Thank God I have a male co-worker who can walk me to my car, and when that didn't work, I'd go to the coffee shop next door and have one of them walk me to my car. I was starting to get anxiety about running into the guy because I would randomly run into him. The dishwasher guy came in one day when I was off and seemed disappointed, but got a haircut from one of the other stylists. Big joke I got returning to work was that he was getting cleaned up for me. No thanks. Well, the restaurant wasn't doing well at this point, and the guy just spends his days watching me. The day before the restaurant closes permanently, the dishwasher guy comes into the salon freaking out that he needs to talk to me. My co-workers basically tell him to get lost and that I'm busy. After that happened, the restaurant closed down and I never saw the guy again. I know it ends kind of abruptly, but I'm really glad I never got to see him again. But the anxiety he gave me definitely is something I won't forget, and I hope I don't run into him again. A few years ago, I worked the graveyard shift alone at a 24-hour Subway, the sandwich shop, not the transit station. About half of the customers were military guys who were also working graveyard shift on base. We were located right next to an Air Force base, and roughly half the customers were drunk people coming over from nearby bars. A small sliver of our customers were mentally ill homeless people and drug addicts who were just attracted to an establishment that was open at 3 in the morning. One night at 3 a.m., a man comes up to the counter, as though he is going to have me start putting together a Subway sandwich. He's wearing a big coat which seemed odd since it was a warm area of California and was probably 70 degrees at the time. He's bearded, probably around 50 to 60 years old, and just looks down and won't make eye contact. "What can I get you, sir?" I ask. He's standing there shuddering, making strange noises, and I realize that he's sobbing. "Are you alright?" At this point, his sobbing turns to laughter. "I gotta come in here to get away from them big grey things with big eyes." "Okay," I say. "You know, the ones with the big eyes that are trying to take me. I have 2 kids, but they took them away from me. They took everything from me. I used to be one of the village people, you know." At this point, an Air Force serviceman and servicewoman walk into the shop, much to my relief, and stand behind the man. The man throws his arms up in the air and says, "You go ahead of me. I'm not in line. I'm not buying anything for myself. I'm buying you kids your sandwiches. You get whatever you want. I'm paying for it." The 2 soldiers politely decline and went to order their sandwiches. I assembled their subs and they began to pay for them, when the man with the coat suddenly announces at the top of his lungs, "I'm God. I am God." The 2 customers then turn to look at the man as he proclaims this. "I will prove my powers." He begins by taking a bag of Doritos off the chip shelf and throwing them across the dining area. "Do you see? Do you see my powers? Behold." The 2 customers finish paying and depart, much to my dismay, leaving me with the man. I run over to the phone and dial the police station. As I do, the man loses his energy in an instant and starts sobbing again and exits the restaurant slowly. As I'm speaking with dispatch, she says, "Yes, we've gotten several calls about this man tonight, but we haven't been able to find him. We'll be down there right away, within a few minutes." Then I see the blue lights of a cop car as police officers take the man into custody along the side of the highway. I always pride myself with being pretty good with dealing with the drunks and weirdos that would come into the middle of the night, but that was one of the few times I actually feared for my life in that job. So, to the Dorito God, let's not meet again. Many years ago, when I was about 21, I was staying at my parents' place after finishing university and figuring out what to do with my life. During those halcyon days, I often went out in the evenings to party and would come back at unearthly hours, and upon return would creep in as quietly as possible, as my parents were very light sleepers. One fine midnight hour, I did just this, having arrived at the house under the swell of a crescent moon, carefully tiptoeing up the gravel drive, gently turning the key in the lock, padding my way to the spare bedroom, and tenderly pushing the door shut. Somewhat pissed, and continuing to remain in the spirit of night camouflage, I kept the light off and stood behind the door and slowly started to getting dressed. Having pulled off my top, I suddenly became aware in the gloom that the door behind me seemed to be opening on its own. Remaining calm, I stopped undressing, and found myself naturally moving back behind the door, as it opened mysteriously into the room. Assuming it was my mum or dad, as there was no one else in the house, and being admittedly still quite pissed as I opened the door, I dutifully craned my neck and uttered, in a slightly theatrical but friendly voice, "Hello?" From that point on, all hell broke loose. For all I could hear in the darkness following my greeting was screaming and shrieking at a high decibel, and the sound of crashing madness in the hallway. I quickly turned on the bedroom light and sprang into the hallway only to be met by more screams of horror, terror, and sheer, unmitigated madness. As I looked down the hallway, I saw my mother stark naked, a somewhat rotund woman, facing me transfixed with fear on her face, falling backwards onto the enormous cupboards along the hallway as she flailed her arms in terror and only screaming louder upon my apparent presence. Her madness combined with her short-sightedness was clearly such that she could no longer recognize me, and I had, in her mind, become some kind of nightmarish intruder who, despite a friendly hello at 1 a.m. in the morning coming from her son's bedroom, was not enough to trigger some much-needed familiarity. It was so strange. For a good 15 seconds I stood there saying, "Mum, it's me," only to have her go into another thunderous bout of terror and screaming. All the commotion obviously woke up my dad, and the scene ended with him emerging from the master bedroom, bleary-eyed and bewildered with a dressing gown on, naked wife hyperventilating against the closet door, and a confused drunken son in boxer shorts looking at him with a sense of desperation and resolute hilarity. Scary for Mum, surreal for me. I used to work in a lab where I would do behavioral testing on rats that would sometimes go very late into the night, past midnight, as rats are nocturnal. There was a little creek behind the building on this college campus, and there were a lot of bushes/grass everywhere. During the testing, I spent a lot of time in my car in the parking lot, waiting for the testing to be completed. One night I was in my car, I noticed a coyote walking very nonchalantly across the parking lot. He basically crossed in front of my car, from left to right, coming about 10 feet in front. I decided to open my door and stand up to look at him. I wasn't too worried about him attacking me, I just thought he looked pretty cool. So I'm standing there and we're looking at each other eye to eye. A grey, very healthy looking coyote, with no fear in his eyes. As he passes in front of my car, he slows and then stops, and stands there looking at me. His posture isn't threatening, he's just kind of looking at me the way I'm looking at him. I'm obviously thinking to myself how neat it is that I'm safe, and we can just look at each other for a moment. And then I start to double check whether I'm actually safe. I had figured if he had bolted for me, I could have just got in the car and closed the door. And even if he got to me, I was pretty sure I could handle him with a knife clutched in my hand. I'm thinking this when it hits me. Coyotes probably don't hunt alone. I had one of those, "he's right behind me, isn't he" moments, and I turn around to find another coyote about 10 feet behind me, staring at me just as nonchalant as the one in front. I basically had a clever girl scene on my hands. And I remember what happened to the poor Australian guy trying to outsmart the raptors. Luckily, their behavior didn't freak me out, so I was calm enough to just stare at this guy too. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 seconds. After that, they just turned their heads and carried on their way into the center of the building, where I got to watch them hanging out looking for rabbits for the next night that I had testing. The next time I had late night testing, I didn't see the two hunters return to their usual grass mounds under the big tree. I was 14, and my family had moved to a big and kind of run-down farmhouse that was kind of creepy but cheap to rent. The closest neighbors were pretty far away, and a cornfield surrounded most of our property. One night around 2 a.m., I woke up to the light in the hallway going on. I'm a really light sleeper, and a few minutes later my dog starts whining outside my door and scratching to be let in. I get up and let him in, and he crawls under my bed to sleep. He does this sometimes, but had never woken me up to be let in before. I was a little weirded out but also pretty tired, so fell back asleep without much thought. I wake up again a little while later to my bedroom door creaking. I see fingers wrapped around the side of the door as it is slowly being pushed open. In a half-asleep kind of stupor, I ask who it is, and a man clearly trying to imitate a woman assures me that it's just my mother. Checking in on you. I keep saying, no, you're not. You don't sound like my mother. And he keeps assuring me that he is. I'm obviously not fully awake yet, or I would have noticed how creepy the exchange was. Suddenly the door starts being pushed even further open, and the hand pushes through the door followed by an arm, and I realize this person is coming into my bedroom. I start freaking out and screaming when I realize what's happening. My dog jumps out from under the bed and lunges at the door, causing the person to shut it quickly and not allowing me to see his or her face or anything. By this time, my mum has woken up from my screaming and starts yelling at me if I'm okay. She comes down the hall to my room and says that she saw a big figure with stockings on his head standing outside my door. My mum started screaming too, and the person ran down the back staircase of our house, which had a door and simply looked like a closet, so they had prior knowledge of its existence, and then they ran out the back door into the cornfield. Nothing in my house was stolen, and there was no evidence that the person that had broken in wanted anything other than to come into my room. I don't think I've been the same since it happened, and I feel incredibly anxious even thinking about it. I worked at Quick Mart on the graveyard shift. I'm the only one there for 8 hours. I've been working here about 5 months now, so I've gotten used to the sounds and all the weird noises. But when I first started, I was informed by a customer of an old man who used to work at the store that died of a stroke about 2 years back. A few days passed by, and I was working a swing shift when the graveyard guy comes in to do the shift change. Me and him start talking, and he asks if I have any questions for around the store. I had everything down on lock by now, but he was like, "Hey, let me show you something." He pulls me into the back room and he shows me this old man's jacket. He went on saying that our manager loved him and couldn't get rid of the jacket. My co-worker told me that sometimes on graveyard you'll hear weird noises. A few more days go by. Explainable stuff happened and whatnot. In the cooler door popping open and then closing. A can of AZ iced tea fell on the ground. It's all stuff with a good explanation that seems reasonable. Well, one night while working a grave and being on Reddit, I hear a scuffling noise coming from the other side of the store. It goes on for about 5 seconds, and I'm kind of freaked out. I start thinking, uh-oh, what if it's the ghost trying to mess with me? Well, I go look over there, and there's a ramen packet by the sugar. It's probably a good 5 feet away from the container it's supposed to be in. It's kind of angled like something was trying to drag it. I got really curious, and I went like the CIA FBI investigators, and I started setting up my iPhone to record for 30 minutes at a time, just trying to figure out what moved it. After 2 30-minute recording sessions go by, and the bag is still there, hadn't moved an inch. I say screw it, pick it up, get my phone, and go back to work. That's when 5 minutes later I heard the scuffling noise again, and get really paranoid about the ghost. The next day, my manager comes in and asks how my night was. I gave her this weird look like, "Do you hear stuff when you work, or what's up?" And she says to me, "Oh, do you mean Frank?" At this point I'm like, ah crap, there is a ghost. So I respond to her, "You mean the old man who died 2 years ago?" She laughs and says, "Oh no, that's Bob. I mean, Frank the mouse who eats all our ramen packets." A mouse in a gas station almost made me believe ghosts were real. When I was a teenager, my older brother moved out and my parents worked late, so occasionally I would spend the evenings by myself after school. We lived in the countryside a few miles out of town and had a good collection of neighbors. The day went as normal. I went to school, got home, turned on the TV, had a snack, and texted one of my friends who I had a crush on. It wasn't long after that I noticed a man outside my house. He walked past a few times. He wasn't an ordinary person walking around the block. He looked scraggly and unkempt. I ducked as far as I could behind a chair, still trying to see him out of the living room window, hoping he didn't see me. But soon, he came to the front door and knocked. I was texting my friend the entire time, increasingly getting freaked out. As he knocked on the door, I stupidly went to answer. I had my phone on me, with 911 at the ready. I tried to silently unlock the door and not alert the man. I opened the door a crack. There was a screen door separating myself and the man. I was ready to slam the door and lock it if anything happened. The man looked at me with crazed, paranoid eyes. He had a large, dark beard and looked to be in his late 50s or early 60s. He seemed out of breath, and his face was drenched with sweat. He was larger too, more the reason to keep my guard. I sheepishly said, "Hello?" "Please, call the police, they're after me," he said in an exhausted voice. He kept looking at the road and tensed whenever a car would occasionally pass. "Who's after you?" I asked, getting ready to slam the door. I barely escaped. They were right behind me. Please, can I come inside?" At this point, I knew to call the police. "Just wait here, I'll get some help." My heart was in my throat at this time. I didn't know if this was the guy that was trying to force the door open, so I quickly shut it and locked it. I ran to the back door and locked that as well, as I called 911. My heart was racing and I could barely tell the operator my information, but they said they would send someone out. It wasn't long until a patrol car arrived, but it felt like forever. The entire time I kept watching the man, who then walked into my driveway, pacing nervously. The officer got out and proceeded to talk with the man, and they got in the car and left. I have no idea what happened to him, nor if he was telling the truth. He could have been drunk or crazy, but it was genuine fear in his eyes when I looked at him. Something truly scared him, and it scared me to think that there could be someone out there that wanted people for whatever reason. So to the crazed, scared man, and whoever he was running from, I'd rather we not meet. First off, I would like to set the scene. This happened in May of 2000. I live in a very rural area of Alabama. My mum was with her friends at a party, and my dad was invited to hang out with his boss. So that meant I got to spend the night in by myself. I used to enjoy being home alone, as I had more time to myself. I decided to pass the time by watching scary movies, as I had rented some on VHS the previous day. I remember that while I was watching the original Halloween, I looked out of the living room window and saw a man dressed in all black, watching me. I couldn't see what he looked like, as if he were wearing a disturbing-looking mask. He stared for about a minute, before walking out of sight. About half an hour later, 3 sudden and loud bangs on the front door caused me to jump up in fear. I cautiously got up and looked through the peephole, and I thought I was going to throw up. The same man from earlier was at my front door, only this time, he was holding a very large knife in his hands. Upon getting a closer look, this man looked to be about 6'4" and was very well built. He stood there for about 15 seconds before he started pounding on the front door, trying to get in. I ran around the house, locking every door and window. I got on the phone with the police, grabbed the machete that I kept in our garage, and told the man to go away and that the police were on their way. But this didn't faze the man at all. Instead, he ran to the backyard, climbed over our 7-foot-tall fence and sprinted to the back door. I then ran upstairs to my bedroom and hid in the closet. The most sickening part happened when the whole house went dark, and I heard the back door get broken down. He had cut the power and broken into the house. I was more terrified than I had ever been. I then heard heavy footsteps throughout the house. He was searching for me. I heard him opening every door downstairs, and after 10 minutes of hiding, I heard him coming up the stairs. I was sweating all over, wondering when the cops would arrive, and after 5 minutes of footsteps, he opened my bedroom door. At this point, my whole life was flashing before my eyes. I was so sure I was gonna die. Footsteps came to the closet. Suddenly, a wave of what I can only describe as a miracle rushed over me. The cops showed up right at the very moment and arrested the man as he tried to escape. I ended talking to the cops and they left after taking my statement. My parents showed up later that night and hugged me tightly, happy that I was okay and alive. I later learned that another family living 2 blocks down from me had had their lives ended. They were tied up with a rope and duct tape and were savagely attacked by his aforementioned weapon of choice. The young son had gotten the worst of it. He was found propped up against the living room couch, his head missing. To this day, I thank my lucky stars I wasn't another victim of that man. I live alone, have done for a few years. This story takes place 2 years ago, before the start of the pandemic. It was just an average Saturday night. It was 1 a.m. and I was up late, gaming in the basement. I'd set up my basement for a gamer's paradise. I had all the old consoles, controllers, memory cards, everything you can think of. And it would be customary that every other Saturday I would have my friends over for some huge and epic gaming nights. This Saturday, however, was one without company. I was downstairs, headphones in, and numbing my brain with excessive gameplay, when all of a sudden, I finished a level, and the music stopped briefly on the loading screen. That's when I heard a faint smack upstairs. Immediately I removed my headphones and listened more attentively. A second smack. Something or someone was at my door. I looked at my watch. It was really late, far too late for anyone to be here. I tentatively started to climb the stairs, wary that it could be something horrible waiting for me, but nonetheless made my way up. An important note is that the basement door opens inwards. Therefore, as I started to pull it open, I slowly peeked my head through, assuming that if anyone were looking in, they wouldn't be able to see me, as from any window on the upstairs landing, it would be fairly clear if the door were open the other way. I peeked my head through and instantly see through the window and illuminated by the orange streetlight a few people standing at my door. They had what appeared to be a crowbar and were trying to pry my door open. Now, I live in a relatively safe area and had always just locked my door out of habit, but now there was someone trying to break in. My door wasn't particularly strong and my locks weren't that great. I knew that it was just a matter of time. I slowly closed the door and locked the basement door from the inside. The basement door lock, in fact, was one I had installed as a prank against some friends. I made my way downstairs, put my cell phone near the window, and started dialing 911. When the operator came on, I frantically told her that there were men breaking into my house and that they had crowbars. She didn't miss a beat, and told me that she would be dispatching someone very soon indeed. She stayed with me on the line, all the while I waited in absolute agony, fearing that the men were going to come closer, maybe break down my door in any second. I was absolutely petrified. I stood there next to the window, trying to hear what the operator was saying, her words of comfort keeping me sane. As the beautiful sound of police sirens permeated the night, I heard an absolutely colossal scuffle from upstairs, and then the police exiting the vehicle and gave chase. At the end of it, Only a few things were stolen. They managed to catch a few of the criminals, but I didn't ever retrieve all of my items. The real loss here is my sense of security. If anyone's experienced a break-in, perhaps they feel the same thing. I just feel unsafe. I've had extra locks put on my doors, even latches put on my windows, but now I just feel vulnerable. I have security cameras outside my home and bought a specialist TV which I turn on almost every night just to watch the outside of my home. It's getting to be a bit excessive, I know, but it's the only way I sleep at night. And sometimes I still don't feel safe in my own home. They robbed me of that feeling of safety, and that's something I can never forgive them for. This only just happened to me. It was roughly 9:30 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Nothing ever happens on Tuesdays. I went downstairs to get my dog so that she could sleep in my bed with me. I said goodnight to my parents, got my meds, and fetched a glass of water. I set the cup down and turned the lights off, totally forgetting about the glass of water. I placed my dog on my bed, turned on my laptop, and I realized I left my water downstairs. I went back down to get it, and saw a car pull up through my kitchen window. I thought it was my older sister, but she was staying at a friend's house. I looked out, and it was a small compact car, and from what I could see, 2 men were inside. I had no clue who they were, so I began stressing out. I tried to get a closer look, making sure I couldn't be spotted. I am a small guy, standing at about 5'5" and weak as hell. A 14-year-old kid can't take on 2 tall, buff-looking men. I saw something in the back of the car, but couldn't quite make out what it was. I snapped myself out of it, grabbed my water, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw one of them getting out and walking towards my house. I lost it at that point, went to my parents' room and asked, "Who's outside?" My dad was confused and said, "Is it your sister?" I shook my head and told him that we didn't know them. They weren't our neighbors, plus their houses are walking distance. There's no reason they'd need a car. He got up and my mum followed. They looked out to the front door and saw a tall man in a grey Under Armour hoodie walking up carrying something. My dad instantly went out there and freaked out at the guy. My mum rushed me upstairs and had her phone at the ready. I went to my room still holding my water. I have no clue what happened. To those 2 guys who creepily drove up to my house when it was pitch dark outside, I hope I don't see you again. I vaguely remember an incident that happened at the house we lived in before we lived in this one. My dad was looking after us while my mum went to a concert. I woke up in the middle of the night to people talking loudly. There was a stranger on our couch, and my family were talking to him. I remember he had blood on his face, and I thought the whole thing was a bad dream. When I got into my teens, I mentioned it to my mum, and she told me my dad forgot to lock the back door and some drunk guy got out of a taxi and came into our house and just sat in the lounge. He'd been in a bad fight and had blood all over him. He left peacefully and was 100% convinced he was at his girlfriend's house in some other suburb to what we lived. It freaked me out when I heard that. My mum and I lived in a cheap single-wide trailer in a really terrible trailer park. It was my single mum working 2 jobs and was going to cosmetology school after my dad left. I stayed with my aunts overnight a lot because my mum would work graveyard shifts. She picked me up from my aunt's house at 7 a.m. one day, and we went back to our trailer. I remember immediately not wanting to go inside, begging to ride my bike, but my exhausted mother just wanted to sleep, so we went in and she laid in bed. I sat up watching Barney for a while, and being the annoying toddler that I was, I woke up my mum and asked to go outside and ride my bike, which we usually kept in my room because if we left it outside it would be stolen. I told my mum I didn't want to play in my room, so asked if I could lay with her. While we were laying there for some reason, I told my mum there was someone in the closet. and that he wanted to hurt me. I have no idea how I knew that. I didn't even think I went into my room that day. She got up to show me no one was there, and when she walked into my room, the folding closet door started to open and got stuck on something. Turns out, a previously convicted child molester had skipped bail on a new trial, watched my mum's comings and goings for a few days, broken into our house while she was still at work. He took my bike in the closet with him, hoping I would come looking for it when I got home, and that was the only thing that kept him from jumping out of the closet to attack my mum when she walked in there, with the spokes on my bikes getting stuck on the little metal tabs at the bottom of those folding closets. Needless to say, we ran like hell out the house, got in the car and drove away. Unfortunately, the guy got out of the house before the cops showed up. Closets still scare me to this day, some 26 years later. When I was in college out of state, I stayed up at a college over the summer, subletting for a friend with some friends. Good times. I was working a late afternoon shift, so I was home at around 2 p.m. during the day and living with a bunch of college friends people. I think I was watching something at the time, but I started hearing some banging and figured a housemate came home at a really odd time and didn't think much of it. As the banging got progressively louder, I decided maybe they were locked in or something and didn't have their own phone because it was getting really loud. Turns out there was a guy actively breaking into my house through the back door. Threw out some shoes, grabbed my phone with my earbuds so that I could call the police hands-free, and chilled by the other door so I could bolt. The guy finally made it in and saw me, and I was actively talking with the dispatcher and bolted. I gave a description, had some sirens, gave a statement, and landlord essentially nailed the back door shut until they could fix the frame and install a new deadbolt. I work the night shift at a plant, from 11 at night to 8 in the morning. One morning a few months back I came home, and when I pulled into the drive I noticed my storm door was open, so I knew someone came by. Then my dog came strolling around the corner wanting to be inside, so I knew someone not only came by, they got in. Upon going into the house I noticed some strange stuff. The first thing I noticed was my TV. See, I always leave a movie on repeat for my dog at night so that he has some light and noise. Well, someone had changed the movie. It was on the title screen. The movie was Predators, the remake one with Adrian Brody and Eric from the 70s show. I then noticed a garbage bag full of random clothing on my couch. It had a pair of pants, socks, and a couple of shirts, and a pair of work boots and shoes. The boots were size 13, so dude was fairly big, I guessed. Inside the pants were fishing lures and a box of condoms. As I investigated more, I noticed that all of my Hot Pockets and frozen pizzas and basically all my snack foods were eaten. Then I noticed a chair in the middle of the kitchen, with short brown hairs all around it, and my clippers plugged into the kitchen counter, and my set of keys were gone. So all in all, someone broke into my house, let my dog out, cut their hair with my clippers in my kitchen, watched a movie, ate all my food, left a bag of crap there, and I guess the joke's on them though, since I used those clippers to shave my man parts. Still weird though. Never found out who did that. Over a year ago I got to bed with my boyfriend, and about a few minutes in I hear my cat jump up the windowsill behind us and start hissing. He growled and meowed a lot, but never hissed, so I propped myself up and looked out the window expecting to see another cat. But instead I saw a man in a ski mask standing just to the left of the window, not looking in at me, and tapped my boyfriend and whispered there was a man outside. He sat up very slowly and looked out, then whipped the window open and yelled, "What the hell are you doing?" The man, who said he was just looking around, to which my boyfriend called BS and tried to jump out the window, but I had some poles set in, ironically, to discourage a break-in if I left my window cracked, so it was too narrow for him to escape from. My boyfriend sprinted out the front door instead to chase him, but whoever it was got away. He was so upset he escaped. We're not together anymore, but I miss that man every day. For about a year I lived in a house with 4 flatmates. We had a pretty big backyard with a garage and a tool shed that we never used. We also had a motion detector light. Two of my housemates were very superstitious and believed in ghosts and spirits and such, and they also liked to get high on different substances. The lights in our backyard would go off randomly. I assumed they were animals, and my housemates were sure it were ghosts. One of them told us she'd seen a man ghost walking through our window when she was high on shrooms. They thought it was scary, and I thought nothing of it because, well, they're high. A few nights later, drunk me thought I saw a man through the mesh door to our backyard. I just thought my mind was playing tricks on me because my housemate kept telling me about the ghost. Eventually, I moved back to my home country, and 6 months after that, I FaceTimed with one of the housemates. Turns out it hadn't been a ghost. A homeless man had been living in our tool shed for God knows how long. That gave me the creeps for sure. A few years back, I moved into an apartment during the evening/night, and then got up the next morning to start unpacking. My roommate had said she was thinking about stopping by some point to drop off some stuff. So when I was in my room and hearing someone at the front door, I thought, oh, it must be Katie. It sounded like she was struggling, and I figured that she just had her hands full. I went to the door, and honestly have no idea why I didn't just open it, but something stopped me and I looked through the peephole. Some man was trying to break in. I froze my hand on the deadbolt until he gave up a few seconds later and just walked away. This happened my senior year of college. I lived off campus with two roommates in a townhouse called Natalie and Katie. Katie was out that night doing homework in one of the school buildings, and I was awoken at 3 a.m. when I heard some knocking on the door downstairs. I thought that was weird considering the hour, but I figured someone had the wrong place and would realize and leave. The knocking didn't stop though, and I lied in bed for a good several minutes thinking, yeah, they'll go away now. They'll go away when they get bored. As one might expect though, I started to grow confused, and then kind of freaked out by this person's persistence. The knocking turned into banging, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. Honestly, I should have probably called the police that instant, but it was the middle of the night, and I was just confused. So I headed to the top of the stairs to see Natalie standing near the door staring at it. Her room was on the bottom floor, and she had just walked up to it. We exchanged a baffled look, because what the hell, it's 3 a.m. This is weird. Natalie called out, and she asked them who they were and what they wanted. We're Katie's friends, said the voice on the other end, who sounded male and about our age. We know her boyfriend, and we've heard she was feeling down, so we came to surprise her. That was a really weird story, but thankfully Katie wasn't even home, so we both informed them of this. Katie's not here, she's off doing something else. Good, they're gonna leave, right? They came here to see Katie, she's not here, they're gonna leave, and we want to go back to sleep. Just open the door. I know. If I hadn't called the police before, I definitely should have done it now. It was weird though. That night I realized why people do stupid things in horror films. Not only had I been woken up out of nowhere, but it feels surreal to be in a situation like this. Like there's no way you could actually be in any danger. That only happens in horror movies and true crime documentaries, and in questionable creepy online stories. It could never happen to me. I'm just a random, ordinary, boring person going about my business. I don't need to call the police. I'm sure everything will work out, be cleared up, and everything will be fine. So yeah, Natalie and I did the stupidest thing and tried to argue with them. We told them that again, Katie wasn't there, and that there was no need for them to stay. Eventually, Natalie asked what their names were. Throughout the encounter, we made out two very distinct voices, but only one gave us a name. And I texted Katie, asking her if she was friends with someone of that name. After a few minutes, during which we were still arguing with the stranger, Katie replied, I am, but I don't think she knows where I live. That wasn't good. But even worse, she? The person on the other door had a male voice, so this was a real name, but not the real person. Whoever this was knew stuff about Katie, like who she hung out with. I told Katie to stay where she was and to not come back, until we told her everything was okay. Finally, we told the guys that if they didn't leave, we were going to call the police. No, don't call the police. Okay, if we wanted to do something bad, we would have done it already, right? Yeah, that's the last bit that wasn't helping their case. Just open the door, okay? The attempts at reasoning with them over the balcony devolved into them telling us to just open the door over and over again, until we finally actually did call the cops, and we hid in Natalie's room and dialed 911, and explained what was going on. Thankfully, there was a police station nearby, so it wouldn't take them long to arrive. Unfortunately, I had made the mistake of heading back into the living room and yelling through the door that we'd called the cops, but contrary to what you might think, that actually didn't seem to scare them at all. They seemed only mildly upset and kept arguing. To this day, I can only assume they didn't believe us. Then, we heard a neighbor's home door swing open, and a very pissed off man start saying, "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the cops." For whatever reason, that was what made them freak out and leave. The police did arrive and we told them the whole story. Natalie revealed that a couple of times she had barely peeked through the blinds of the window close to the front door, and she noticed that there were two guys, but only one of them was ever at the door at a given time, and they would switch, one by one, sitting in the driver's seat of a parked car out front, presumably for getaway purposes. So that's reassuring. They also hadn't looked drunk, according to Natalie, and they definitely hadn't sounded as if they were. There wasn't much the police could do besides sweep the area a bit, but they told us that if the strangers showed up again, to immediately call instead of engaging with them. One of the officers did give us some self-defense tactics and told us what kind of household items and chemicals would be best for self-defense. After making sure everything was okay and reassuring us, they left, and we eventually called Katie and told her the weirdos were gone. She arrived and was understandably shaken. We sat down and asked her who it might have been. She did know people who had come to the apartment, so someone, certainly, but Natalie hadn't recognized the guys outside as any previous visitors. Worse, it turned out that not only did they know Katie's friend's name, but they also claimed to know her boyfriend, even though he didn't live in the same state where they were going to school. She swore up and down that she didn't know anyone who would do that to hurt her. But by the point it was around 5 a.m, so I didn't even bother going to sleep, since I was going to a workshop that morning, and I told a lot of my classmates the story. It freaked them out too. And the entire day Natalie and I jumped at every unexpected noise, every shadow, every random movement. That night it was hard to sleep. I expected to hear knocking. Thankfully they never came back, ever. But that almost makes the thing more unsettling. I'll never know what they wanted that night. Did they think we were hiding Katie? Was she seeing less than savory people in secret? I guess we'll never know. I try not to let it bother me, but I wish I knew if my life were in danger that night. I have the feeling it may have been. After all, they weren't wearing face coverings, so if they wanted to commit a crime, they may want to get rid of the witnesses. But despite of how much I knew, random strange men who insisted to let me in? Please, let's not meet. My husband works a rotating schedule, so sometimes he works night shift, and other time he works days. 2 days ago he started his night shift rotation. I always feel uneasy at home when he's not here, even though we live in the country and it's supposed to be safer. Around 9:30, Friday night, I was doing my dishes. My daughter was watching TV and my dogs were sleeping. I had just turned the sink off and I heard our screen door open. It makes a swoosh kind of noise when it opens and closes. We have a little entryway between the screen door and the main door. A few seconds after I heard the screen door, I saw the main door handle turn all the way down. It had an electronic keyboard lock, so the handle turns even when it's locked. I feel so lucky that I remembered to lock it. Immediately the dogs started acting weird. They're running to the windows trying to look out and they're growling and barking. As much as I didn't want to, I looked out the window and saw nothing. No person, no car, not a damn thing. I picked up my daughter and took her to the bedroom and called 911. It only took a few minutes for the cops to get there, because I guess they were all just in the area. I told them what happened, and they looked around and briefly told me the winds opened the screen door and no one was out there. Whatever. I live in the woods. The person was probably standing 100 feet away, watching them doing their half-assed search. I haven't felt safe in the house since. I've even started locking the screen door. It's not like the house looked empty. All the lights were on and the TV was playing a show. I can't even describe the deep fear I felt when I saw the door handle turn. I'm glad the dogs are very vocal and scary sounding. It definitely deterred the person from trying harder to get in. This happened in 2016, when I was a 17-year-old, first-year college student in film school. My name's Julia, and I'm currently 22. I lived alone in my first ever apartment. It was really small, but I was really proud of my independence. I never felt unsafe in the apartment for several reasons. There were multiple gates in the residence that needed to be opened through a code that only people who lived there knew. My door had 3 different locks, and it was right next to the university. So most people who lived in the neighborhood were college students. Nothing bad ever happened in the neighborhood before. I've always been very careful with locking the door whenever I leave my home. I also always check twice as I have slight OCD. So this one time I leave to go to class and lock my door, but for some reason I couldn't get the key out of the lock. It was completely stuck, so I went to the caretaker of the building so that he could help me, but he wasn't there, and I was going to be late for class. So I went to class with the key still in the lock. I took off the keychain first so it wasn't too noticeable. And when I got home, the caretaker was back, and he came to help me, and we couldn't get it out for 15 minutes until somehow we did. He told me the lock was damaged, but that I didn't necessarily need to change it if I only locked it once inside instead of twice. I said okay, and that was the end of it. I really wasn't worried because of how safe I felt in this building. Fast forward 2 months later, and I was walking out of the trash one night at 11 p.m, while on the phone with my sister. I remember telling her that I was taking out the trash. Then, I would always take a shower before heading to a party. As I previously said, I always locked the door, even just to take out the trash because of the lock being damaged, and it was only one. When I got back to my apartment, I found the door unlocked, which immediately alarmed me. So I went back into the apartment and locked the door immediately with 3 different kinds of locks. When you walk into my apartment, which is just 215 square feet, you have the main room in front of you and the bathroom door immediately to your left. I had left the bathroom door slightly open, even though I could see a man in the shower, turning his back to me. Naturally, when I saw this, I tried to open the door and leave as fast as possible. Except my main locker was damaged from 2 months earlier, and I couldn't open it no matter how hard I tried. In this moment, all I could think of was the fact that I had to leave as quickly as I could. I jumped out the window without really thinking, and figured it was the only solution. Except I lived on the 2nd floor, so I completely smashed my ankles in the landing. I started running in whichever direction I could when I got a little bit further from the building. I looked back and the man was there, at my window, watching me run away. I thought of 2 possible outcomes. Either the man was going to jump and chase me, except I wouldn't get far with my twisted ankles, or he would get scared of heights and be locked in my apartment. Thankfully, he picked option 2. I went to hide in a little bush further away and called the police, who arrived in just 10 minutes because I was living close to the station. They pushed my door open and the man was just there sitting on my couch holding a kitchen knife, waiting for me to come back. They arrested him, and later told me he had already been arrested for sexual assault, rape, and attempted kidnapping and attempted murder. They also told me how everything had happened. Like it was a very friendly neighborhood with mostly college students, so we got inside the building by other people holding the door open. He then heard me telling my sister I was going to take a shower, which is why he was waiting in the bathroom for me. He picked my lock while I was taking out the trash and apparently noticed me on school campus and followed me home several times before succeeding in actually getting in. He stayed inside waiting for me because I'd only recently changed my phone and the previous one was still on the table. So he thought I didn't have the phone with me to call the police. I don't live there anymore, but after that, to get into the building we all need identification proving we live there. Building IDs were created and we need to scan them every time, and it was the only way to get inside. Nothing bad has ever happened in that building after that. My name is Thomas. I'm a 33-year-old man that lives in Baltimore City, better known as B-More or Bodymore in the urban area where it's dangerous. But when you live your whole life somewhere, you tend to adapt to your area. The following story happened 5 years ago when I was 28. I was walking to my buddy's place at about 10 p.m. to buy some green. His house was about a 15-minute walk away, and on the way back, I nipped into the store, because I had my cousin's independence card, so I definitely was going to buy some munchies for a post-smoke snack. But on my way back, I saw a white car drive past me and pulled up a side street a block away. Mind you, I had my earphones in, but didn't have anything playing in case someone tried anything funny. When I got to the block where the car was, a guy hopped out the car and tried to catch up with me. I started to feel unnerved by his ever-growing proximity, and when he was within earshot, I heard him utter something. I then took out one of the earbuds and with an annoyed tone said, "What do you want?" He instantly shot me a fierce reply, to not speak to him that way, and it was at that moment I saw a silver firearm that he was clutching in his coat. I had a bag of junk food in my hand and a bag of green in my shoe. Without missing a beat, he said, "Where's the money?" I then realized I was being robbed. I stopped in my tracks. "I don't have any money, I've just got this bag of green." It was at that moment when someone else hopped out the car. He was armed too, and went onto the right side of me. I was now standing with two armed men at either side of me, and did the only logical thing I could think of. I took off my shoe and threw the bag of green to the ground while sputtering, "That's all I've got." With a fierce reply, he shouted at me to put my shoe back on. As I started to, I looked around. There were plenty of people watching me nearby, watching all of this go down. The guy on the left then went, "Yo, if you don't pull out $1, I'ma shoot you." My fight or flight kicked in. With no money on me at all and nothing to appease the robbers unsatisfied with their loot, I pulled my pants up a little more because I was preparing to run, and before I could say anything else, sprinted up the street. I was only 3 minutes away from my house. As I bolted, I passed people wearing crazy expressions as they'd seen the entire ordeal. When I got 2 blocks from my house, I ran through a parking lot and headed by a gate that had a lot of high bushes and trees, and caught my breath because I couldn't run anymore. But I didn't stay long because I was still scared and didn't know if I was still being chased. So I got the hell up and jogged the rest of the way to my house. Once I composed myself and made sure I wasn't followed, I sat down and told my little 8-year-old cousin just how dangerous it was at night in Baltimore City after dark. Oddly enough, I was telling him earlier that day how dangerous it was, and telling him a story of how I was robbed on another occasion. Safe to say, I no longer try and go out after dark.